Oh, my head. I missed you so much. Where did you go? Northern released his hold on the Chaos Prince, scowling. Stop yelling like I vanished for days. Chaos Prince shook his head vigorously. 1 minute without you on this battlefield feels like 10 days. Do you have any idea how much a mad punch hurts? It stretches your days, elongates the pain, and compresses it into one single moment. Northern. It takes an eternity to finish feeling the agony of one blow. I tell you. Northern forced a smile. Trust me. I know exactly what it feels like. He shifted his gaze to Cryos, who stood motionless on the ground. So, discover anything useful while battling him. The Chaos Prince pondered for a moment or two, then suddenly his eyes widened. Yes, apparently he's supposed to be weakened right now, but amazingly I haven't been able to land a single hit. Northern frowned. And that's useful how? The Chaos Prince shrugged. It suggests the wise decision would be to flee. Northern's frown deepened as he looked at Cryos, who was also watching him. I'm not running away. The Chaos Prince hung his head like a sulking child. I know. You're quite determined to die. The Chaos Prince suddenly narrowed his eyes and studied Northern. I don't understand. Why are you so desperate to protect a world that isn't even real? Northern met his gaze, expression ice-cold. There are real people living in it, and some of those people are precious to me. I would burn the world for them, and I'll save a burning world, as long as they're in it. The Chaos Prince's eyes lit up as an idea struck him. Then we can just take them away, right? Northern kept his eyes fixed on the origin of chaos, answering with mild contempt. That would be inconvenient. The Chaos Prince shook his head and sighed. You're a very peculiar and stubborn person. He raised his fist for a bump. Well, here's to getting our asses handed to us in the most gruesome manner possible. Northern eyed the fist bump, his expression twisting in distaste. I'm not getting my ass handed to me. I'll be doing the handing. He ignored the Chaos Prince and plunged downward with lethal speed. The faster he descended, the more velocity he gained as he hurtled down at that terrifying pace. Simultaneously, thousands of comets bathed the entire atmosphere in their glow. It resembled twilight. Chaos Prince surveyed the scene with trembling lips. He could feel the searing heat embracing him like a second skin. It was mesmerizing, he couldn't deny. The sheer magnitude was enough to drown all of Stelia in disaster from which it might never recover. The only thing sparing the small island continent was that none of this energy was flying around haphazardly. It was all focused on a single opponent who stood on the ground wearing a nonchalant expression. The wind suddenly turned vicious and whipped forward. As it lashed out, the unconscious Terrence was swept up and hurled through the air. But the throw, while appearing catastrophic, was actually gentle and controlled, carrying her toward the group of people standing at the landscape's edge, over 3 kilometers away, watching the unfolding disaster. Even at that distance, Northern knew it wouldn't save them from the collateral damage of what he was unleashing. He hoped they realized it too. And finally Northern struck. His body, like a living missile, shattered the sound barrier 3 times over before connecting with Cryos. The ground didn't just crack. It obliterated. A massive crater erupted outward from the point of impact, sending shockwaves that split the already battle-scarred plains into a spider web of fractures extending for miles in every direction. But that was only the beginning. The thousands of meteors followed milliseconds behind, each one a miniature star burning with the fury of creation itself. They hammered down in a relentless cascade, each impact magnifying the destruction exponentially. The stony ground, already weakened by their prolonged battle, couldn't withstand the onslaught. Where there had once been plains, now yawned a hellish landscape of molten glass and superheated rock. The existing craters were swallowed whole, merged into one colossal wound in the earth that stretched nearly a mile across. The valleys that had been carved by their earlier exchanges simply ceased to exist, filled with torrents of liquefied stone that glowed like rivers of liquid sunset. The heat was so intense that the very air shimmered and warped, creating mirages that danced across the devastated terrain. Steam hissed violently where the molten rock met cooler stone, sending up curtains of scalding vapor that would have cooked any normal being alive. Raven picked Terrence up and immediately flew away with terrible speed as she saw the entire landscape wrapped in maws of vicious burning heat and flames. First Northern transformed the land to a snowscape. Now it seemed that he was trying to make it into a hellscape. Even Ellis watched with a terrified expression. He flapped his wings quickly, flying away from the destruction at great speed. All of them did, albeit with a pale look on their face. The amount of sheer devastation was enough to crush an entire nation to the ground, maybe not obliterate them completely. But it would make them suffer for 20 years to come, trying to stand back up in a nation. Northern was a walking destruction. This guy was chaos. High above, the Chaos Prince shielded his eyes from the brilliant inferno below, feeling the heat even at his elevated position. The twilight atmosphere had turned into something resembling the surface of a dying star, painted in violent oranges and reds that pulsed with each new explosion. When the bombardment finally ceased, an eerie silence fell over the transformed battlefield. Where solid ground had once stretched to the horizon, now lay a lunar landscape of glass, molten stone, and smoking craters within craters, a testament to the sheer destructive power that had been unleashed upon a single target. The Chaos Prince sighed. That was... He froze mid-sentence as an intense cold suddenly assaulted him. He frowned slightly and looked up. The sands that Northern had lifted up the ground earlier had been completely frozen. Now it was a large mountain of ice floating from above. Chaos Prince's eyes widened. Don't tell me he's gonna drop that. The clouds trembled greatly with a thunderous sound as the enormous ice like a frozen sky slowly drifted down. Nobody told the Chaos Prince that he needed to vanish away from the ice's path. He simply flew away with frightening speed. The mountain of ice descended like the wrath of winter made manifest. What had once been countless tons of sand, now frozen solid into a crystalline monolith the size of a small city, plummeted toward the already devastated landscape with inexorable force. The air around it crackled and hissed as the extreme cold met the superheated atmosphere, creating violent thermal currents that sent shockwaves rippling outward. The impact was beyond comprehension. The frozen mass struck the molten hellscape with a sound like the world splitting in half, a deafening crack that echoed across continents. The collision of absolute cold meeting liquefied stone created an explosion of steam so massive it blotted out the setting sun entirely, turning day into an apocalyptic twilight of billowing white clouds. This one, more vivid and lasting than the former. The molten rivers of stone flash froze instantly, creating twisted spires of black glass that jutted up like the skeletal remains of some primordial beast. The superheated air condensed so rapidly it fell as scalding rain across the transformed battlefield. Where the ice touched the molten crater, the ground shattered like ceramic, sending massive chunks of frozen stone hurling in all directions. The thermal shock was catastrophic. Cracks spread outward from the impact site like lightning frozen in stone, splitting the earth with such violence that new chasms opened up, swallowing the previous destruction whole. The very bedrock groaned under the stress as layers of earth that had taken millennia to form were compressed, shattered, and reformed in mere seconds. Steam continued to pour upward in towering columns, creating its own weather system, a localized storm of ice and fire that painted the sky in impossible colors. Hail began to fall, each stone the size of a man's fist, as the conflicting temperatures created a meteorological nightmare. Miles away, even the fleeing observers felt the ground buck beneath them like a living thing. Ellis's wings faltered as the shockwave reached them, and Raven clutched Terrence tighter as she fought to maintain altitude against the turbulent air currents. The landscape that remained was alien. A patchwork of frozen wasteland and cooling glass, split by canyons that glowed with residual heat and crowned by jagged ice formations that defied gravity itself. It was as if the elements themselves had gone to war, and the earth had become their battlefield. Through it all, at the epicenter of this elemental apocalypse, two figures still stood apart from each other, seemingly untouched and unfazed by the devastation that was being wrought about them. In a landscape barricaded by rolling hills and jagged terrain, the golden glow of late evening draped the kingdom in weary light, the sun's dying rays scattering like wounded embers across shattered towers and blood-stained waters. The grand palace of this kingdom, once the jewel of artistry with its jade domes and gilded spires, still stood, though not unscathed. Massive claw marks raked across its marble walls, as though some colossal beast had tried to peel away its glory. Windows that had once poured light like blessings were now blackened sockets, their stained glass shattered and strewn into the river below like broken prayers. The bridge, still spanning proudly across the emerald waters, bore the weight of recent battle. Statues of heroes and generals, once guardians of peace, were chipped and scarred. Many had lost arms, heads, or their entire forms, toppled into the depths by vicious claws and monstrous fury. On the great bridge leading to the grand palace, a few defenders who had protected the city sat in exhausted silence. The mangled corpses of monsters lay scattered across the streets, draped over walls, their blood painting a grotesque palette of horror. It was a terrible sight. Surviving soldiers limped through the wreckage, gathering bodies, while commoners helped where they could. Everyone busy with one task or another. But those who sat were too drained to move. Among them was a boy whose body looked carved from bronze stone, perfect in every muscle, a masterwork of the dead stars themselves. He never hesitated to flaunt his sculpted form, though now several wounds wept blood across his frame. Deep blue hair matched his piercing blue eyes, and dried blood streaked down one side of his face. He lay sprawled on the stairs, or what remained of them. The stone steps had been crushed so thoroughly they formed more of a slope than proper stairs. Beside him sat another boy with the same azure hair and eyes, but this one was lithe and ethereal. He too bore wounds across his slender frame. Finally, the muscled one spoke. "Have you seen Father?" The lithe one remained silent for a heartbeat, then strained to answer. "He mentioned something about ensuring the prince's safety, I think." The muscled brother sighed and gazed ahead. Beyond the ruined stairs stood a fountain carved with cranes spiraling through rushing water. Half the birds now lay in pieces. The basin itself was a pitiful sight. But as he watched, the fountain basin suddenly exploded, hurling white stone shards in every direction. The muscled youth instantly threw out his hand, conjuring a shimmering shield that covered the entire stairway. Debris clattered against the barrier and bounced harmlessly away. The lithe boy and the other wounded defenders slowly rose, dark grimaces etched on their faces. The slender youth bit his lip. "Bless stars, we barely held the city." His brother stood beside him, waiting for the dust to settle. After the monster invasion, everyone was spent. But they wouldn't surrender their home without a fight. As the dust cleared, footsteps emerged from the haze, resolving into human forms. The muscled defender tilted his head slightly while the others readied themselves. Despite their battered bodies, their eyes blazed with lethal intent. These warriors were prepared to die. The lithe boy stepped forward, extending his hand to summon a sleek, massive sword resembling a claymore. The others conjured their weapons as well, filling the air with crackling sparks. However, the muscled youth frowned as he recognized someone in the approaching crowd. He raised his hand. "Wait!" His brother turned to him. "Brother Wah? Lady Annette, is that you?" The group emerging from underground was vast, like an entire city's population still filing out behind the first wave. At the forefront stood Annette, Helena, Zeke, and Hara, with other citizens following. Au and Mew were absent, having taken a different route for their separate mission. The lithe boy looked confused at first, then his eyes slowly widened. "Oh, Lady Annette, the one you said was hot." Instantly, the muscled youth shot his brother a murderous glare. Seeing the familiar face, Annette stepped forward with a slight smile. "Arlem, good to see you again." Arlem chuckled sheepishly. "Likewise, Lady Annette. Please ignore what my brother just said." Annette turned to the younger boy with an amused smile. "Of course it's no surprise that I'm hot. I have fire running through my veins." Her smile faded as she surveyed the kingdom's devastation. Then she returned her gaze to Arlem. "Would you mind taking me to whoever's in charge here? And tell me what happened along the way?" Arlem nodded, but in that instant, his brother stepped between them, glaring at Arlem while eyeing the lady with suspicion. "Surely you're not thinking of taking her to the prince?" He faced Annette and looked beyond her at the crowd. "We should clarify why they're here first. Our nation has suffered terrible losses today. We're on edge. After sending requests for backup to the Alliance and getting no response, we have every reason to believe this could be another trap." Annette studied the boy. He resembled Arlem in every way except for his lean build and sharper features. Arlem tried to caution him silently. "Listen, Jackim. These people would never hurt us." Jackim whirled on his brother. "It's been months since you last saw them, brother. Don't be naive. Your paths may have aligned when you were all trapped in the Dark Continent. But the moment you stepped out, those paths diverged. If they're here to exploit our downfall, to conquer us and kill our prince because you led them to him, how will you redeem yourself?" He looked away for a moment. "What am I even saying?" He returned a piercing gaze to his brother. "There is no redemption for such a thing. I will be the one to kill you." Arlem sighed, clearly fed up, but he turned to Annette and asked with weary patience, "Lady Annette, please, what's going on?" He gestured toward the crowd behind her. "Why are you here with all these people?" Annette studied Jackim, a faint smile playing on her lips. Then she shifted her gaze to Arlem and leaned her weight onto one leg. "There's a massive siege engulfing the entire continent. The military is crushing every nation systematically. Those backup requests you sent? They probably went unanswered because they never arrived. The Central Plains are in chaos, Arlem, and nobody knows the full scope of it." Arlem was shaken. He frowned. So did the others standing at the stairs. Jackim glared directly at Annette. "How do we even know you're telling the truth?" Annette sighed. "Boy, do I look like I have time to lie to you? My friend and student is in Stelia, fighting for the world's fate. I'm not about to be grilled by you. Will you take me to the person in charge? Or do you want to find out just how scorching I can get?" Jackim stared at her with blank eyes for a long moment. Then he swallowed and turned around, frowning. "Follow us." Arlem glanced at his brother and looked at Annette as they drew closer. He walked beside Annette while Jackim led them past the palace's fallen gate. Annette looked around. She could see the enormous bodies of monsters and couldn't help but wonder how they'd managed to defeat such abominations. She turned forward and asked, her expression slightly twisted, "Just what in Ul's world happened here?" Arlem shook his head dejectedly. "It was a catastrophe, Lady Annette. One minute I was dining with my family. The next, terrible maelstrom were erupting from the water and crashing down on the city. Before we knew it, men in black uniforms had surrounded our walls. From the mountains, from within the city, everywhere. Even inside the palace." Annette's face contorted with mounting horror as she saw the bodies being gathered and the staggering losses they'd suffered. Flying with Northern, they'd managed to save some nations, but none had endured this much devastation. The carnage made her think, if Northern were here, they wouldn't have lost so much. At first, she wanted to berate herself for heaping responsibility on Northern again, but she had to face the truth. What would change if she'd been here? Nothing. So the only person who could make a difference was Northern. The only one capable of saving everyone was Northern. She shook her head in anguish. Arlem, seeing her expression, smiled grimly. He hesitated. "Lady Annette, is the Central Plains truly under siege?" Annette nodded. "This is only a fraction of the losses we'll suffer if we do nothing." Arlem sighed wearily. They finally reached the palace hall's entrance. Jackim turned to Annette. "Please choose who should accompany you." Annette looked at Zeke, then at Hannah. The three of them continued inside with Arlem and his brother, while the rest remained outside. A long procession trailed behind, though not everyone from South Drywall was present. Some had scattered in different directions. They entered the hall, walking through the enormous hallway that had become a graveyard of columns. Soon they climbed a spiraling staircase that led to a vast hall beyond two colossal doors pushed open by guards. The space was grand, with blue curtains now shredded to tatters. Toward the right, where grand windows once stood, gaped a gaping wound that had claimed most of the wall, as if something monstrous had slammed into the side of the palace and crashed through. Stone shards and broken pillars littered the throne hall. Black, putrid blood stained the floor, but no bodies remained. As Annette and her party entered, everyone in the throne hall turned toward them. Quite a few stood below the dais, while the prince himself sat exhaustedly on the wide azure throne. Among the men in the hall stood one figure, massive like a standing bull, his armor making him imposing despite the terrible, impossible dents scarring its surface. A white bandage covered one eye, and his deep blue hair fell around his neck and back like a mane. Jackim approached the man, who bowed and whispered something to him. Then he walked up to the prince and whispered in his ear before returning to his position. The other elders in the hall wore various types of armor. None looked pristine. All had suffered one casualty or another. "I greet you. I'm not sure what to call you. My subject tells me you bring urgent news about the continent's state." Annette breathed deeply and stepped forward, stopping fewer than 10 steps from the rows of armored elders facing each other. She looked up at the prince and began. From the academy itself to Variolania, Arrival, Bercenthium, Welster, Drywall, all these nations have suffered devastating attacks from monsters and men in black uniform just like you have. But that is barely a scratch of what really is going on. Drenched in evening light, the valley lay hushed beneath its mountain's shadow, trembling with catastrophe. The towering cliffs had carved out this region's proud palaces. Evening light spilled across green fields and silver rivers, creating a haunting testament to the land's devastation. Massive smoke coiled where villages once stood, their thatched roofs shattered, fields torn into muddy scars beneath claw and fang. The grand palace itself, etched into the mountain's very bones, burned with scattered fires, its gates battered, its walls scarred by monstrous siege. From the river rose blood stench, carried by corpses drifting downstream. In the cold evening light, beast cries echoed through the gorge, circling ever closer, as if the mountains themselves had become cages. But that was what one saw without taking a deeper, keener look at the disaster. While the territory had suffered devastating losses from the initial assault, it was actually the attackers who had suffered more, and now regretted ever attempting to breach such a formidable clan. Several hunched creatures scattered across the land, brutally ravaged by sinister black-armored knights. The creatures' gaunt frames stretched over sinew and exposed muscle, slick with blood. Jagged spines jutted along their backs, each a cruel weapon, while elongated limbs ended in claws sharp enough to shred steel. Yet they scurried away in raw terror as the dark-armored warriors closed in. The knights suddenly halted. Half a second later, something streaked across the sky and crashed into the fleeing abominations, shaking the earth with a shockwave that rippled outward in expanding circles. From the sudden silence, someone slowly rose. She was draped in black elegance, braided hair framing a pale, unyielding face, her eyes cold crimson shadows that regarded the world with quiet contempt. Clad in black lace and a corseted coat, she stepped from the dust cloud. As radiance painted her pale features, she appeared like beauty forged into a blade, silent, severe, and untouchably alluring. Does everyone even know where these things are pouring from anyway? What is the cause for the sudden invasion? As the voice came, the knights clad in black armor suddenly flinched and parted away for the person walking from behind to pass. The person that had spoken was a tall figure carved from muscles and shadow. Long black hair cascaded around sharp ears that rose like a wolf's, framing a face both calm and somewhat sleepy. His crimson eyes glowed faintly beneath the mark etched on his forehead, a dark star that seemed to drink in the light. He walked with an unspoken menace, a sentinel born of night and strength. He stood in front of the girl that had climbed out of the disaster she wrought. She looked up into his eyes. "Aren't there any other areas that require your attention, brother? Or are you just latching on to me because you don't want to do anything?" The man looked down, his eyes half closed. Then he crouched down like he was actually going to sleep where he was. His gaze fell wearily on the mangled monsters. Then the next second he bent down and started puking. The lady, standing in front of him, recoiled away from the vomit with a mix of anger and disgust on her delicate face. Seriously, third brother, if you hate the sight of blood so much, why are you even here? The boy gasped as he struggled with more vomit. First brother said, I can't sleep when the clan is under attack. Said something about common courtesy. Blurg. He emptied the contents of his stomach mid-sentence. Then brought out a black napkin that he used to clean his mouth. What does that even mean? Common courtesy. Since when did that become a thing within a family of slaughterers? I think first brother is just way over his head because of uncle's return. I heard uncle used to be his favorite person before his disappearance. The girl in front of him looked at him with some leftover disgust before stepping aside. I am not going to gossip about first brother with you. If you have a problem, go to him. And please, please, third brother, don't follow me. You can follow first sister. She can condone you, but please let me be. Huh. Okay. The man looked at the girl, dark circles beneath his drooping eyes. He then smiled foolishly. Cute. The girl recoiled at the word but did not waste another second. Instead, she launched and flew into the air, in search of more monsters to slay. Meanwhile, the third brother bent down there, looking down. Suddenly, though, the entire place trembled greatly. His expression faltered for a second. The dark knights behind all observed their surroundings with caution and growing suspicion. Then the ground towards their west side suddenly exploded, spraying shards of stones in all directions. The knights were all alerted, staring at the sudden explosion with maximum guardedness. A cold red light emanated from the darkness of their visors. They raised their shields and readied their swords. But the man that was bending down earlier was still bending down, staring down at his own vomit with a cold and indifferent expression. People were climbing out of the hole in the ground, and although the fog of dust was quite strong, the knights could see the vagueness of their figures. One knight stepped forward, placing his sword on the rim of his cone-shaped shield as he cautiously stepped forward. Don't you dare move forward. Stop there. All of you. As the sound boomed across, movement stopped. The man bending down turned his head to observe them all. He tilted his head slightly as he did. He suddenly vanished from where he was, and the dark knights saw him no more. Meanwhile, inside the fog of dust, a large boom suddenly resounded. The shock wave of it scattered and dissipated the fog of dust in an instant. Everything became clear, and behind them, a young man with black long hair and sleepy eyes was holding Nebulous Lord's fist. Nebulous Lord was covered with a gray cloak so his identity does not leak. He had also totally suppressed his aura at Annette's request. He was tasked with guarding the second party that took the tunnel route to the Kageyama territory, in order to inform them of the danger. Somehow, the strange young man had sensed what was supposed to be insensible. Zahir was here, and he couldn't even sense Nebulous Lord's aura after he hid it. But somehow the young man had. He turned down and slowly lowered his scarf covering his mouth. We have not come to fight. It was barely a second later before they were all surrounded. More knights had flown over and a few other distinctive people. About 3 of them. The little entourage of people that came to relay the message of urgency were surrounded from all sides. However, Zahir was unfazed. But the lady next to him, however, the girl with electric blue hair, she had been calm for most of the journey, but Zahir knew her for a bit. She, him, and Gordon had been on the elite team of Therion for the longest. In short, the lady was mad. And her madness was not going to work in their favor. As they were surrounded from all sides, something flashed in her eyes. It was like her activation code was inputted and then she came online. Her calm passiveness suddenly vanished, replaced by a dangerous demented smile, one that stretched from ear to ear. He immediately turned to his back, signaling to Ryan who was behind him. The lady suddenly flared her hands. They snapped and twitched. She was about to launch herself off the ground when she suddenly stuck to it. Her leg, up to the knee level, was suddenly frozen. She glanced at Zahir in confusion and snarled at him like a schizophrenic monster. You and your mutt. She lowered her lower body and with one hell of a ferocious might launched into the air, completely turning the ice that froze her legs into shards. But Zahir al-Noor was fast. He vanished like white smoke and collided with her mid-air. The two of them crashed on the ground and tumbled towards the left, away from where the members of the Kageyama clan were standing. He hooked the lady on her neck with one hand and pressed her to the ground, while she snarled at him viciously like she wanted to gouge out his nose and crunch it with her teeth. The knights surrounding them were at high alert. They'd seen all things, but they were not sure if they'd seen their assailants assault each other instead. Even monsters had the decency to be more organized and cooperative than this. A man stepped forward from the remaining crowd of people. He was an ashen-haired man with a gentlemanly face and aura. He bowed politely before them and spoke with measured cadence. He was utterly poised and demanded attention with softness. "My name is Sale of the White String. We have come for an audience with the Patriarch concerning the fate of our continent." The air was silent even after Sir Sale had stepped forward. The Kageyama lands were a new and strange niche even for the man. The best he could hope for was that the gentility of his words could strike them an opportunity to speak without having to cut each other's heads first. But if the latter was the only seeable solution, he was also not the kind to back away from such difficult solutions. What must be done needed to be done. Zahir, Jinxa, the Marked Blade himself, Ghost of the Grey Lantern, Ryan, and this nebulous-looking thing they of course called Nebulous Lord were particularly selected in anticipation for the worst. Sale stood, radiating pure approachable aura. But the knights they were surrounded by were extremely cautious. Someone released their stance amongst the three people that came and slowly started to walk forward. The young man had a pale face that carried a cold, aloof beauty, sharpened by the scar trailing down his cheek. Tousled black hair framed his crimson eyes that glowed with quiet menace, as if lit from within. A long braid fell over one shoulder, contrasting the stark black of his loose attire. Twin red and black earrings swung with each subtle movement. He seemed the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to command a room. His silence was weight enough. The scar spoke of survival, the eyes of defiance, and the careless fall of his hair suggested a disdain for appearances, even as every detail made him unforgettable. He wore his darkness like a second skin. He finally stopped in front of Sir Sale and looked down on the man with a gaze that felt pressuring and at the same time nothing. It begged for carelessness, but Sale was a wise man. The Arrow Sage lowered his head and bowed respectfully. "I greet you." The young man in front of him looked at him indifferently. No smile, no frown. His face was just there. He turned his head in Zahir's direction, who was already standing up with Jinx's hand pinned behind her back by his. "Who are you people, and why are you here?" The Arrow Sage lowered his gaze in submission. Not just his gaze, his body language was subtle, controlled, and in every movement submissive. The man acted like a diplomat who was negotiating the release of 10,000 criminals and had to be as gentle as he could because lives depended on him. "We are here because it is absolutely necessary for us to be here. The attack on your clan, this attack is not just on your clan but on every nation in the continent. We have come because we need to deliver a very important message to the entire continent." The young man's eyes did not shift. However, the wind did make his long earrings dangle a bit. Sir Sale continued, "The end is coming. Right now, as we speak, a team of paragons are trying to prevent it. But the entire continent has to prepare for the worst." The guy stood, did not say anything, but just stood indifferently for a couple of moments. Then he suddenly laughed. However, as quickly as his laugh came, it died down, and he fixed a cold and strange glare at Sale. He turned, but before he turned, he glanced to the back, taking a passing look at the creature which the third brother was holding by its feet. A corner of his lips rose as he fully turned and then walked forward. "Follow me. The best I can do is grant you audience with my father. Whatever happens from there on is totally on you all." The third brother behind released Nebulous Lord's hand tentatively, stepping back with a dark frown before he caught up to his brother in a flash. "What are you doing? You are going to allow them an audience with father." The young man smiled gently. "If they are dangerous, wouldn't you have obliterated them all by now?" The third brother answered, a bit puzzled. Well, yes, they had no ill intent. Even the monster. The young man chuckled as he walked forward, his earrings dangling again. Then that is all that matters. Besides, that monster is the reason why I am letting them have audience with father. The third brother frowned first, then his eyes slowly widened. Second brother, don't tell me. The young man smiled darkishly. Yes, Yun, father has a passion for shiny toys, agents of massacre, and barely looking at that creature I could tell in one instance. I'm sure you also saw it. Father will definitely want the present. And this will inevitably lead to their demise. The third brother, Yun, glanced back at them and whispered to his brother. Second brother Jiang, you certainly are a very wicked and foxy person. I don't like you. And you are a lazy and talented prodigy, Yun. What we all had by working tirelessly, you slept through the hard-working part and just came to claim the rewards for yourself. If you were not my blood, I would have tried to kill you 9 times. I'm sure I would have succeeded 8. Yun laughed shortly. Second brother is honest to a fault. I like how you rub death's fur and kiss its fangs. Jiang scoffed at his brother, and they continued forward silently. Behind, Sale and Zahir were speaking as they followed the Kageyama scions. What do you think? Zahir's voice was cold as his looks. Sale was silent for a few seconds after Zahir asked the question. Then he sighed. I doubt there is any world where we will enter an assassination family's territory and expect to leave without cutting each other's heads off. Zahir smiled shortly. That is an insightful perspective. Sale chuckled sadly. I am not proud of it. Zahir looked at him, lifting his scarf to cover his mouth. Whatever the case would be, we have 2 wild cards. At least we will be able to get out of here alive. Sale looked troubled. His face was rough and tired. I do not like violence. Zahir looked forward as they walked. I also don't, but the only choices we have are choosing between what we don't like and losing our lives. I think I'll choose violence in this case. His eyes sharpened with a cold, lethal light. Sale and the rest of the entourage were taken into the cave. They entered a stairway that took them up the cliff, and before they knew it, they walked within glossy black walls. The ashen light of the moon spilled through vertical windows that looked like something that would have been much more suited to a cathedral. The buildings in the Kageyama clan had a peculiarity to their nature. They were carved into cliffs, their spired tops shooting towards the sky like colossal needles. They looked like cathedrals, dark and ominous cathedrals that worshipped what should not be worshipped. Their interiors had windows that were difficult to sight if one was looking from outside. They reached wide stairs and climbed up, entering a vast hall, one with very few columns, but darkness spread across this hall like it was an assembly of attendees. Far ahead, to the deepest, uttermost end of the hall, an enormous seat draped in crimson luxury could be seen. Despite the encroaching darkness, the grace of the throne seat and what was seated on it was unmatched. It made the darkness itself seem decorative. Staring at it made Sale's heart thump loudly within his chest. The Kageyama clan's patriarch. He had heard about it. They were a family of masters, savants, sages, and paragons well capable of killing drifters 2 or 3 ranks above them. No one knew, though, if their patriarch, who was a paragon, could kill a luminary. Sale didn't think it would be possible. The space between a luminary and a paragon was so wide. How wide? No one even knew. And that was probably the reason why the clan patriarch wouldn't be able to defeat a luminary. Because there were no luminaries in the world today. Sale believed the clan's outrageous talent definitely had something to do with their heritage and studying what was already available. With the unavailability of luminaries, killing a luminary was just impossible. No one knew how they even fought, not to speak of killing one. They walked deeper into the hall, disappearing into the darkness that surrounded them from all sides. The only thing they could see was the one step before them. They were suddenly asked to stop by the knights surrounding them. At this point, they had arrived at the center of the room, drenched in the darkness. The seat in front of them was now more visible. What they all could first see was an enormous black bird with long black beaks and eyes that were still as liquid darkness. It lay sprawled across the feet of the crimson throne seat, spreading across the entire area of the dais, filling it and merging with the darkness. They could not see the face of what was sitting on the crimson throne except the fact that it was draped in black flowing garments and had wet, long black hair. The man's voice boomed across the entire hall. "What have you brought to me, Jiang?" The young man in front of them lowered himself to one knee. "Father, these foreigners have requested to have an audience with you." The man's voice boomed again, sounding as though it was being channeled by every darkness in the chamber. Death wasn't an option? Sale swallowed with tension when he heard that. However, Jiang responded almost immediately. "They claim to have come for a noble cause, one that involves the detriment of the continent as a whole." There was silence in the large hall for a few heartbeats. Then, after what should probably be 2 seconds, his thick, rocky voice came again. "Why the Kageyama clan? We are known to take life, not to protect it." Jiang lowered his head even more. "Perhaps you would love to speak with them directly?" There was silence again. Then, after a second, his voice came out, vibrating the air. "What is the situation?" Jiang responded, his voice and tone measured with amazing order at a deliberate pace. "First brother and first sister and second sister are containing the catastrophic behemoth, while third sister is acting alone as usual. Fourth sister and fourth brother are dealing with the monsters trying to run away. What are the damages?" "Nothing significant. A few villages on the outskirts, but it has been contained. The Jimasai family lost 3 people. The Kunokois lost their family elder. I presume the production of kanais and white wine will suffer a huge blow in punctuality." The man clicked his tongue. The irritation was so palpable. "The invasion. Have we found out anything about it?" Jiang smiled. "No, father. However, I suspect it may be tied to the reason why these foreigners are here." At that moment, Sale, Zahir, everyone in the hall, felt it. The patriarch's gaze fell on them. It was so heavy, so crushing, that it made them realize that all the while they had been in the hall, the man had not even been looking at them at all. It was not until Jiang's last statement that he finally looked at them, and the atmosphere above them changed drastically. They suddenly felt naked. The darkness, every corner of it, seemed to be glaring into their souls. The patriarch's voice echoed through the darkness. "Step forward." Sale, with a long draw of breath, stepped forward, coming closer to the back of the man who had earlier spoken to them, Jiang. The darkness delivered the patriarch's voice to them. This time it was louder, striking upon their beating hearts with terrible weight. "Who are you?" Sale 1 second was trembling slightly and trying to stop himself. The next, as he drew another breath to respond, his breath suddenly became controlled, flowing without an iota of fear. "I am Sale of the White String. With my companion, we are the frontliners of the Therian Citadel." He stopped, lowering his gaze enough to take a glimpse at the enormous bird at the patriarch's feet. It was truly breathtaking. The man's fortress of a voice interrupted. "What do you seek?" The arrow sage spoke with calm cadence. His tone was cool and not losing any of its gentility despite the overwhelming pressure of the patriarch's gaze. "We seek to tell the clan of the impending destruction of the Central Plains. As we speak, a team of paragons are in the continent of Stelia trying to stop the advance of an origin. The world is going to face a terrible upheaval, and we must do something to either prepare for our demise or contain it." There was a long silence in the hall. This time it was longer than ever, and the air drifting across the chamber suddenly became cold as it brushed against their exposed skin. Then the patriarch's voice came again, as Sale was expecting. "So?" Sale was struck with shock at the patriarch's response. He had tried to think of all possible responses to the matters of the imminent doom of the continent. He had thought up different scenarios, and yet this one did not fail to hand him over his balls of surprises. The air, the dark chamber. Everything was silent after the patriarch's question. All he had said to the news that the entire continent might as well be nearing its end was, "So?" Aloof didn't even begin to describe it. This was a level 4 apathy. The man did not share an iota of concern for the matters they tabled before him. They were like a mini version of the Empire. Ruthless, uncaring for the state of the continent they sat on, selfish. It was a good thing that this was not the only path they were asked to take. Thalen had particularly told him something to say, who to ask for in this case. It was why he volunteered to go to the Kageyama clan instead of Annette herself. He sighed, controlling his breath before speaking. If so, may I speak with Shin Kageyama? In that instance, all of them felt the air change. Yun was rather indifferent, his gaze fixed with focus. Zhang's eyes narrowed with suspicion. He glanced back at them, and the patriarch's gaze also seemed to press on them with the weight of a mountain. What business do you have with my brother? Sale answered softly. His son is in Stelia. As this matter greatly concerns him, I was hoping to have an audience with him to convey the details. The patriarch's voice crawled through the corners. It almost was like it was circling back to reach them from behind. What details? Sale lowered his head. I am duty-bound to relay only to Shin Kageyama and his wife. The hall trembled. The darkness seemed to crawl away. The group felt their hearts plummet down to their stomachs. Before they could get a good grasp of their surroundings, it seemed like an enormous crow gazed down on them, its long, sharp beak almost piercing out Sale's eyes, who was standing in front of them. But then, it was just the patriarch standing before Sale. He was tall and large. His black hair fell over his back and shoulders. His head was shaped like a box, his chin defined. His crimson gaze was the coldest Sale had ever set his eyes upon. I could kill you right here, right now. Sale smiled. Wouldn't that be a disrespect to your brother? He may be an outcast, but he is your brother, the only surviving member of your siblings beside you. He is precious to you. You respect and adore him for his sacrifice and for his skills. The man's large hand grabbed Sale's face and slowly raised it up. The arrow sage suffocated beneath the man's hold. He felt his skull squeezing as if an iron grip was crushing it together. He struggled silently, clenching his teeth, even as blood began to drip down from his nose. Zahir frowned slightly and stepped forward from the crowd, still holding Jinxa strongly. Lord Patriarch, I am Zahir Al-Noor. Forgive my partner. The man looked at Zahir. The Noor clan were reputable nomads before their extinction. You have my condolences. A chuckle sounded from behind the scarf covering his mouth. The patriarch sighed and released his grip. Sale fell to the ground, holding his head and coughing blood as he doubled over. The patriarch looked at Zahir. Have you come to avenge your clan? Zahir chuckled again. Oh, how I wish to gut your entire clan right this instance. But now is not the time. However, I do not deny that we have a score to settle. We need to speak to your brother whose son may be dying. What? The sound did not belong to anyone in the hall. Came from behind. Zahir and the group glanced back. Two men walked down the hall from behind. One was a man with short black hair with a scar over one eye, along with another man, tall and slim with spiky hair. The man with short hair walked closer to the group, coming face to face with Zahir. What did you say happened to my son? Zahir looked at the man with a cautious gaze before speaking. I believe he is in the continent of Stelia, fighting for the fate of the Central Plains. Therian said to relay to you that Northern is fighting to protect a world that belongs to his parents. He needs you to help move the entire continent to stand up as backup. The atmosphere was tense and silent. Shin's gaze illuminated the darkness in a strange way. The darkness crawled further away. Light did not pierce the hall, but they could see around them better. Shin turned to the patriarch and bowed. Please, Lord Patriarch, grant me permission to leave. I will not. The patriarch's response was immediate. He shot a grim glare at Shin and then turned over to the group. What is stopping me from slaughtering you in all this instance? You walk into my kingdom to sow seeds of despair. Sale raised his hand and slowly but painfully stood up. Then he looked straight into the patriarch's eyes with a blood-stained nose. You can slaughter us all. We don't really care, but it won't stop the continent from dying. Besides, the fact that your cousin died trying to protect a world for his parents while you sat down and watched that world burn. Shin looked at Sale and clenched his hands at his side before turning to his brother again. I am sorry for just leaving when I just came back. But I am sorry, Suho. But I have to go and save my child. The patriarch stood silent for a second, then spoke with a sharp tone of authority. Leave us. Immediately, the knights surrounding the group grabbed one person each and hoisted them out, quickly and silently. Jiang Yun and the tall and slim man were the last to step out, leaving Shin and his brother Suho. Shin and his brother Suho stood alone in the darkness of the main hall. Suho Kageyama was a towering man. He had the build of an iron pillar and looked far more weathered than Shin. If anyone claimed Shin was the elder, it would spark heated disbelief. Shin looked nothing like an elder brother. Beyond keeping his beard cleanly shaven, he possessed a slender frame, sharp features, and cropped hair that trapped him in perpetual youth. He pierced his brother's eyes with his stare. What are you doing, Suho? The patriarch's eyes narrowed like steel. After all this time, we finally have you back. What's going on? Why would you abandon us? For an adopted child, no less. Shin's expression darkened. Mind your words, Suho. That adopted child consumed 15 years of my life. He is my child, my firstborn. Suho's lips twisted into a smirk. Technically not, brother. You know that. Shin's resolve wavered. He understood exactly what his brother meant, the very reason he'd been forced to return to the clan. Because of his daughter. His fist clenched. I'll pay for my sins, Suho, but I won't leave my son to die. Then you'll abandon your daughter. Shin spun to leave but froze, whipping around in disbelief. Are you serious right now, Suho? She's 3 months old. The patriarch's gaze intensified, boring into Shin. The clan has rules. Crow blood flows through her veins. We must swear her in. Shin stared at his brother, face draining of color, trembling. My God, I thought you'd learned from how father destroyed us, from everything we lost. I thought those lessons had forged you into something better. My lessons. He shook his head, voice quaking. But they accomplished nothing. Absolutely nothing. The patriarch lifted his chin, fixing Shin with a commanding, ruthless stare. No, brother. You're wrong. They accomplished everything. His eyes blazed. They perfected me. Those lessons, especially the one you taught by abandoning me and dumping every responsibility on my shoulders, revealed the true nature of power. How to forge the ultimate instrument of slaughter. He chuckled, stepping toward Shin, then circling him like a predator. You know how father obsessed over creating the perfect weapon of death. Our siblings perished under his hands because he believed he could perfect them. Eventually, he succeeded with you, you became his champion. A flawless assassin. The finest that ever existed. He stopped behind Shin, leaning close, his voice slithering like poison. And then he discovered one fatal flaw. His lips curled. You were weak. You cared about them all. The children. The innocent lives. You began questioning what could have been. Oh, sweet Devon. You should have witnessed how it drove that man to madness. Shin continued staring ahead, his expression now guarded. He failed, and his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He blamed the world for infecting you, blamed me for being part of it. So every time, he tortured me to hell and back, made me suffer for the defect I represented. At 20, I'd never truly lived. I was tortured, learned to strike by being struck, learned to run by being hunted, learned to kill by dying. He paused, breathing raggedly. Then you appeared and slaughtered father. I was grateful. You stood with me at last. The world seemed right. Then you vanished, fled from me. He glared with burning intensity. And now you want to flee again. He smiled with twisted delight. But that means nothing. I mean, you were never truly here, right? However, the real reason I can't let you go to Stelia isn't because of your son or whatnot. It's because of my weapon. Shin's frown deepened. Your weapon? Suho Kageyama chuckled darkly. I finally created what our father failed to achieve. A being hardwired to kill, for her it's like a default setting. I pondered your flaw deeply and wondered, What if slaughter becomes the solution for caring? What if killing is justified as necessary morality, understood only by a mind willing to make the difficult decisions? Shin's expression tightened, his voice nearly trembling. What did you do? The patriarch's grin widened. What did I do? Oh, come now, don't look at me like I'm a monster. The real monster is in Stelia, right beside your son. She's saved hundreds by slaughtering thousands more. She was certain it was the only possible way. That's how it was meant to be for her. And in the years to come, she'll butcher more with that same justification. That is the ultimate weapon, one that sees killing not as a job to be done, but as a gift to the world. Shin stared at his brother with terrified, trembling eyes. Dead stars, Suho. You've lost your mind. What have you done? Suho staggered back, grim shadows falling across his face. It's fine to leave, brother. Go save your son, I don't care. But I'll drown you and your wife in crow's blood if you don't abandon that little bambino of yours. Shin studied the patriarch and released a dry chuckle. Aisha will drown you and this entire clan in blood first if you try anything. For your sake, don't attempt to stop me. The patriarch folded his massive arms, tilting his head slightly. The elven lady? Ruffsburg warned me about her. Special people want her. I'm certain they're with her already. Shin's eyes widened in horror. His expression hollowed completely. Even his voice transformed. Where is my wife? The patriarch laughed. Oh, you fool. Perhaps if you're fast enough, you'll catch them smuggling her away. His eyes glinted with lethal light as he unfolded his hands and spread them wide. But who says I'm willing to let you go? Shin's eyes sharpened with dangerous, arctic fire. He opened his hands, white sparks crackling around them. Step aside, Suho. The patriarch grinned like a lunatic. Or what, brother? You'll violate me in the name of vengeance like you did to that target? Such a pathetic excuse for a man with common urges. Perfect weapon or not, I guess you're just a man with a pitiful third leg after all. Dafun. Aren't you even curious about the child? You came all the way here to find her. Shouldn't we sit down and discuss her? Shin's frown crumbled, his eyes trembling, even his cheek quivering. No, it can't be. The patriarch tilted his head, studying Shin with grave intensity. What, you thought the clan would let Crow's blood flow through an outsider's veins and do nothing about it? He grinned wickedly. But don't worry. I'm the only one who knows about it. Even though Shin seemed to be standing right in the middle of the hall, in front of his brother, the patriarch of the Kageyama clan, he was not fully present. His mind was blank. His attention was drowned in a pool of confusion, questions, and memories he was desperately trying to dig out. This person that Suho was talking about, he had no idea about her. He didn't even know she existed. Of course, he had seen reports of the event of the Dark Continent. One name was consistent in the mouths of several people. It was Raven. But her full name had never been written in the reports, strangely enough. Or maybe he didn't care about the reports enough to see. He had read them to discover what Northern had gone through, why his son had changed so much and couldn't find so much, so he wasn't interested in the girl all that well. But Suho's words made sense because, according to the report, Northern was a part of the girls' team that helped search for a way out of the Dark Continent. The team was disbanded due to an argument that no one was particularly clear of. Northern started to act alone after they returned. She evoked a flood that caused thousands of deaths and was captured by Luengard. So Shin understood the fact that she was beside Northern, and he also understood that her being in the Dark Continent must have been wired by Suho in collusion with Ruffsburg for a field experiment, which was successful. But that was not the terrifying phase of all of this. The target whom he had no idea of, someone he completely did not know but out of rebellion had raped. His brother had somehow retrieved that child, groomed her as his own, and sent her to the middle of a monster-ridden continent, right beside his own adopted son? Was this coincidence or planned out? No! Shin did not want to believe it was planned out, not by his brother. Suho was not clever enough to create a plan of such staggering scope. Then Ruffsburg? But the question was, what resources, what information? did Ruffsburg possess to be able to create such an impossible plan? Shin's mind was racing in different places and angles at the same time. Terror, pain, fear. Every emotion mixed with each other in the depth of his heart. Every beat of his heart felt crushing, too heavy to beat. He thought that he would be able to find retribution for his sins, only to find out that his past had caught up with him. It was too late. Suho had personally been hand-weaving his punishment, his reward, for a long time. Shin did not feel betrayed at the realization, but he would be lying if he said he didn't feel hurt. In the end, his family was so broken that there was no way to get revenge. Not even the smallest way. It was why he did what he did with Northern. His decision must have endangered Northern, but Shin, looking at this moment, found more consolation and did not regret his decision. If he were to teach Northern about the world from his own point of view, he would mess the little child up. He couldn't teach him the essence of combat because it would slowly integrate the boy into the heritage of the Crow. The Kageyama clan was a bit different. The first patriarch was a man who called himself Oda Nobunaga. He said he was a ruler in his old world who had committed seppuku only to find himself reborn in this world. He was a strange man through and through but was the founder of the Kageyama clan, the heritage of the Crow, and he was the one who created such a bloodline that even till now is recognized as one of the best. This man, his cultures, his manner of doing things, set Kageyama on a different path for life. But Shin felt like his family had long ago derailed from the vision that the first patriarch had for them. He felt that the family had derailed so much that the word perfection was a fairy tale of the past. And that was why so many patriarchs were so hung up on it. This chase for what should be perfect instead of accepting themselves and tracing their paths to the old ways has corrupted the authenticity of the family. It has ruined the clan. And such damnation, such ruination, had burrowed its way into the point of their heritage, the integrity and principles of their battle art. The Kageyama clan was defective and its legacy, the heritage of the Crow, was becoming something monstrous. He could feel it every time he tried to use it, and that was why he had to suppress it and not use it as much as he could afford not to, protecting Northern and his family from such a defect. Shin did not regret his decision to leave. He did not regret it at all. But at the same time, he felt wounded in several places. Like a constellation of holes had torn through his body in less than a heartbeat. He felt exposed, worthless, dying. He wished for death. He felt sorry too and craved another opportunity to try again. To choose another way to resist the puppeteer strings of his father and the ruthless principles of his family. To meet Aisha again as a different person, to meet Northern again as a different father, and to teach him the world from the lens of a father who had conquered his fair share of the world. Not one who had corrupted it. Shin wanted to continue to sulk, but couldn't. He was sharp enough to recognize the solution to all of this. And as it dawned on him, a dangerous red light burned in his eyes and he slowly straightened, looking at his brother with a lethally sharp resolve. The crimson light in his eyes was like the flat of a blade when light fell on it and danced across its edges. And looking at it made the patriarch grin like a demented bastard. He opened his hands, black sparks flowing around them. I would rather kill you than let you get out of here. The large crow at the dais of the throne seat stirred. The wind in the dark palace was hushed, flowing along the lower ground. The upper atmosphere of the palace was drenched by an unnatural darkness, most especially with the strange movement of the bird from earlier. The atmosphere changed drastically. It wasn't a temperature drop or rise. In fact, there was no visible change. Everything was just somehow registering to Shin's sharp senses that had been honed by his years and experience of brutal slaughter. Shin held a sword in his hand. Suho Kageyama also held another sword. It was long and curved, a perfect odachi that looked like it had been dipped into liquid darkness. The obsidian color of the blade seemed to drip, in fact. The patriarch held the sword with both hands and looked at his brother. Shin was also doing the same. One hand was holding the hilt of his own curved katana, while the other hand was just beneath the pommel, supporting it. Both of them watched each other, their eyes gleaming with sinister red light. The crimson of the patriarch's eyes was more demented. It shone with an unsettling radiance, exhibiting eerie menace. Shin's glow was a calm crimson radiance, dangerous nonetheless, like the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. But that was the irony. Shin had something to lose, but he was ready to give his life for that something. In a sharp, quick heartbeat, he had decided his brother had to die. The wind on the lower ground calmed for a moment. As if falling to rest and taking a breath as it was about to pick up, both legs moved. The movement was inconceivable, imperceptible. They were gone, and they clashed in the center of the air. As they did, the entire palace shook with cold force. Cracks battered the upper layers of about 10 pillars that were closest to their clash. Dust blasted out of the pillars a second later, and the high arched ceiling shook as the pillars holding it had been greatly shaken. But the two of them did not, of course, care for that. As they clashed with each other, they tore away from each other again, each landing on the vertical body of a column. With the same flow, same rhythm, both of them pushed their bodies lower and shot forth like a spring, obliterating the columns they each took off from. The columns exploded as if they were gunned by a bomb of force. The two combatants shot towards each other with terrifying speed and flew past each other, landing on another column. No one saw what happened, because it was fast, but silver sparks had scattered in the air right at that moment. They wasted no other second, not even a fraction of it. They pushed off the columns and clashed again and again and again. In the upper air of the hall, both of them became lines of silver and darkness, shooting at each other with imperceptible speed. All that could be conceived of them was the aftermath of their collision and speed, the explosion of each pillar they took off from, and the more pillars that suffered cracks and explosions as collateral damage. The sound of their blades was haunting and rhythmic. There was a space before each ringing again. The space was consistent in pace with the explosion of the columns, and silvery black zigzagged lines were being drawn in the air as they flew all over the place, clashing and disengaging from each other. The ceiling groaned. Stone fragments rained down like hail as another pillar buckled and split. Shin twisted midair, his blade catching moonlight through a shattered window. The katana's edge whispered through empty space where Suho's neck had been a heartbeat before. His brother was already gone. Shadow stepping along the wall's surface like gravity meant nothing. The obsidian odachi came down in a vertical slash that would have cleaved Shin from crown to groin. He rolled left along the column's curve, feeling the blade's wind pressure kiss his spine. Stone exploded where the dark steel struck. Suho's weapon carved through marble like it was wet clay. They separated again, 40 feet apart, perched on opposite walls like gargoyles. Neither breathed hard, neither blinked. Suho's crimson eyes tracked his brother's micro-movements, the slight shift in shoulder angle, the minute adjustment of grip. Shin's gaze remained fixed on the space between Suho's collarbones, where the killing stroke would land. His eyes were sharp and locked, bringing back the old killer he had forgotten. A chunk of ceiling crashed down between them. They moved. This time Shin came low, blade angled upward in a rising cut meant to open Suho from hip to shoulder. But Suho was spinning, using the momentum to bring his odachi around in a horizontal arc. The blades met with a sound like breaking thunder. The shockwave pulverized every remaining window. Glass fell like crystalline snow. They locked there for one frozen moment. Brother against brother, steel grinding against steel. Suho's demented smile reflected in Shin's calm eyes. Then Suho twisted his wrist. The odachi's curve caught Shin's blade and threw it wide. The patriarch's follow-up thrust came straight for the heart. Shin wasn't there. He dropped backward into a bridge, letting the dark blade pass inches over his chest. His own katana swept up from below, aiming for Suho's exposed wrist. But Suho was already airborne, using Shin's own blade as a springboard to launch himself toward the vaulted ceiling. He struck the stone with both feet and pushed off, diving down with his odachi held in both hands like a spear. Shin rolled aside. The obsidian blade punched through marble flooring up to the crossguard. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from the impact point. The entire palace floor tilted slightly. Neither warrior paused. Suho ripped his weapon free in a spray of stone chips and swung horizontally. Shin ducked the cut and lunged forward, driving his pommel toward his brother's solar plexus. Suho caught the strike on his blade's flat and twisted, trying to trap Shin's weapon. But Shin was already flowing around the attempted bind, his katana sliding along the Odachi's obsidian surface with a sound like grinding bones. They disengaged again. This time Shin landed on a listing pillar while Suho touched down on a pile of rubble where another column used to stand. Doesn't this bring back memories? Shin did not respond. His eyes were sharp and locked onto Suho's neck. It was like a predator who wanted nothing else but the taste of that juicy neck. And Shin's focus was eerie. In a dimly lit room, cold crimson flames flickered atop several antique candles positioned in delicate corners, mounted against the walls to illuminate the space. Yet all they accomplished was making the place more sinister. The entire darkness was bathed in red glow, as if a ghost of crimson stalked through the shadows. A single bed stood with a side table beside it. On the flat surface, a small lantern shaped like a floating sphere perched on a thin stem, but the crimson light cascaded down and around, obscuring the stem from view. The scene was darker still because of the disaster raging outside. But usually, almost everywhere in the Kageyama clan remained shrouded in darkness, as most of their buildings were carved into the mountains. On the bed, a blonde woman sat cross-legged, a newborn sleeping peacefully beside her. Aisha's hair stirred softly in the absence of wind. Her eyes were closed, and she murmured something beneath her breath, words too faint for even the air to carry. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open, their golden radiance blazing with alarm. Something was wrong with the atmosphere. It felt tense, though the air seemed perfectly still. Aisha reached for her child, but her hand swept through empty space. Her eyes widened and darted to her side. Empty. She whipped her gaze forward with a razor glare. A voice emerged, calm and cutting. "Careful now, princess." Before her stood a man shrouded in a dark hooded cloak that flowed like liquid shadow over him. He wore layers of the garment, resembling a traditional ceremonial leader. His hood revealed only his mouth, where a large silver ring pierced his bottom lip. His lips curved into a smile. "Oh, how long has it been?" 300 years. Aisha remained silent, her glare fixed on the man's hands with blade-like intensity. The man gazed at the child in his grasp. The baby slept soundly still. He chuckled softly. "She is beautiful, Orisha." Aisha bristled with hostility. "Peacemaker, return my child." The man, Peacemaker, fell silent. A somber smile played across his face as he studied the child. Then he tilted his head slightly, regarding the baby with momentary irritation before meeting Aisha's eyes. "This child is an abomination, my dear Orisha." Aisha's glare erupted like flames from a furnace. The room's temperature spiked. The man chuckled dryly. "You still possess a child's temper. Reckless, uncomprehending, lacking control and foresight. Orisha, you exist for a greater purpose, a higher calling. I am struck with shame and bewilderment that you would abandon such destiny for." He looked down at the child with revulsion. This. In that instant, Aisha's golden eyes became twin furnaces. Rings of fire suddenly materialized around the man's hands, but he moved swiftly, dropping the baby and dissolving into the air like vapor. Aisha dove low and caught Silver before she could hit the ground. She rolled with the baby in her arms and sprang to her feet. As she moved, more circles of flame manifested around her, barring the man from approaching during that vulnerable second. Peacemaker had no choice but to retreat from the blazing rings. They spun like wheels and intersected each other. As Aisha sprang upright, she lunged toward the window, the wheels of flame trailing her. Peacemaker pursued. Aisha twisted midair and crashed through the glass with her back, shielding her child. The wheels merged into two separate discs and flew after her, rolling beneath her feet as she plummeted. As they spun under her, her trajectory shifted. Aisha pivoted and soared through the air with sharp velocity before landing on her own terms. The moment she touched down, however, she found herself surrounded. Knights of the Kageyama clan marched around her as though they were expecting her. More figures in hooded robes, dangerous violet eyes blazing beneath their cowls. Aisha surveyed her captors. She understood the hooded figures, but the knights as well? A frown creased her brow. We've been betrayed. Oh yes, you have. Peacemaker descended like a falling storm cloud before materializing once more. He clasped his hands behind his back, smiling. You have abandoned us all, Orisha, but you remain our salvation. You are a princess and you belong to Stuart. Please, little one, return home. The man's voice was grating and unsettling, yet laced with feigned care and compassion. Aisha suddenly laughed, then shook her head. Listening to you now, one might think, what? Peacemaker truly loves the princess. He's trying to bring her back. Peacemaker is a worthy servant of Stuart. Her gaze sharpened, darkening with hatred. Not realizing you're a treacherous bastard. The man circled her slowly, both enclosed within the ring of knights and hooded figures. Orisha, you remain naive, for 100 years after that event, and still a baby lost in the woods. Aisha chuckled mockingly. Of course I am, Peacemaker. Naive, that's the word you perfidious hounds use for subjects who refuse to acknowledge your arrogant motives. Reviving Vitten? Spare me such lies. All of you, including my detestable father, are ruthless puppet masters. Aisha drew a breath, her voice growing sharp. Escaping your manipulation was merely the first step in my plan. She laughed. Did you think I wouldn't come hunting for you eventually? That I wouldn't repay what you did to me and my sister? She placed one hand on her chest, meeting Peacemaker's gaze. Have patience, old fool. Exercise just a little patience. I'll be with you shortly. Peacemaker's smile had vanished during Aisha's declaration. Now he wore a dark, hostile expression. He lifted his chin. My orders were to retrieve the princess unharmed. But I'm certain the Lord of Air would understand if a scratch or two were found on you. After all, he knows how insufferable you can be. He stepped back and waved one hand forward. Immediately, the knights of Kageyama clan unsheathed their swords and surged forward. The robed figures followed suit, flowing as if the air itself were their ally. The wheels of flame materialized again, 6 this time. All of them whirled around her with blistering speed, interlocking and leaving no opening for any attack to penetrate. As they thrust weapons at her, she weaved between their edges like a ballet dancer. She somersaulted with ethereal grace, rolled through the air, landed on the tip of a spear and vaulted skyward, spinning like a dancer embraced by the dark heavens. She touched down gracefully, the wheels spinning around her, her baby still cradled in one arm, her gaze sharp with lethal intent. She halted the rolling circles and seized one in her free hand, then placed her baby upon another. As she did, the remaining 5 wheels encircled the child, spinning rapidly and forming a shield of swirling flames around Silver. Aisha left the child floating and tightened her grip on the wheel she held. The wheel's diameter expanded until it was large enough to use as a hula hoop, blazing with vicious, merciless flames. Aisha extended her arm and leaned forward, death gleaming in her eyes as she fixed her stare on Peacemaker behind the ranks of knights and robed figures. Don't say I didn't warn you. The battle between Shin and Suho was rudimentary at best, nothing flashy or terrifying in scale. However, that was all the more reason to fear them. The palace struggled to contain their exchange. This was the battle between 2 men trained to walk through volcanic flames without skin to protect their muscles, to scale Arctic peaks without the lightest linen to shield their fragile flesh. Both men, stripped of their talents and relying purely on training instilled by their clan, were like monsters born of nothing but brute force, clashing and shattering the world around them through sheer impact alone. Shin rolled across the room like a blade cutting silk, his feet never touching ground for more than a heartbeat. Each step cracked stone. Each movement burned afterimages into the dusty air. Suho moved like water finding the swiftest path down a cliff face, inevitable, flowing without wasted motion. His odachi traced perfect arcs through space, each cut calculated to intersect where Shin would be, not where he was. They had abandoned the pillars. The pillars were gone, scattered and shattered throughout the palace, and it was only a matter of time before the ceiling collapsed. The structure held only because it was carved into the mountain itself, but with no pillars supporting it and the continuous force unleashed by the combatants, collapse was inevitable. They broke apart, chased each other across the room at breakneck speed, curved like barely perceptible traces of light, and clashed again. The hall shuddered. Debris and dust plummeted from above. They continued regardless. Their swords sang a cold, metallic song as steel rang against steel, both shooting forward like stars, leaping between chunks of collapsed ceiling and mounds of pulverized marble. Shin's katana came in low, seeking the gap between Suho's ribs. Suho shifted his weight to his back foot, letting the blade pass through empty air, while his own weapon descended toward Shin's exposed shoulder. Neither strike landed. They never did. Instead, Shin continued his forward momentum, stepping inside his brother's guard. His empty hand shot toward Suho's throat. Not a grab, but an open palm strike meant to crush the windpipe. Suho tilted his head a fraction. Shin's palm struck the stone wall behind where Suho's neck had been. The impact drove a spider web of cracks 15 feet in every direction. Suho's knee came up toward Shin's ribs. Shin twisted, taking the strike on his forearm instead of his torso. The bone didn't break, but the force lifted him off his feet and sent him skidding backward across the rubble-strewn floor. He landed in a crouch, katana held low and ready. Blood ran from a cut on his cheek. Suho straightened slowly and curled the corner of his lips, giggling eerily. His crimson eyes reflected no light. In the settling dust, he looked like a statue carved from shadow. "You've grown slow, rusty." Shin rolled his eyes. "I'm grateful for it. I despised being so skilled." Just as he wanted. Suho shook his head. "Fool. Our brothers died trying to achieve that skill. Yet look at you, not an ounce of appreciation. You know, instead of welcoming you and your wife with open arms, I should have slaughtered you both the moment you dared step into my domain." Shin clicked his tongue in disgust. At least that would have been more honorable than playing coy like a serpent. Apparently someone's forgotten we are crows, not snakes. He sighed somberly. "But then, you've probably killed every elder who could help you understand the essence of the Kageyama clan." They circled each other now, stepping over chunks of their childhood home. Each footfall was deliberate, placed to avoid loose stone that might shift and cost them a crucial millisecond. Suho laughed wildly. "Exactly. You noticed too. The clan is so much freer than when you left. Those old blowhards had to go eventually, didn't they? They were just like father." The air between them thrummed with potential violence. Then Shin's voice cut through. "And so are you." He exploded into motion, reading his brother's telegraphed attack like scripture. But as his blade swept toward where Suho would be, he realized the footwork had been deception. Suho was coming from the right instead, Odachi held in a single-handed grip, the extra reach letting him strike from an impossible angle. Shin couldn't block, couldn't dodge, so he didn't try either. Instead, another Shin materialized from thin air and collided with the sword, while Shin himself drove his blade straight toward his brother's heart. However, Suho was devastatingly swift. He blocked both Shin's clone and Shin's own attack with fluid grace, the speed so incomprehensible that the sound of his blade was not twice, but once. Even Shin was shocked. He lost focus for a heartbeat, and his brother drove an elbow jab forward. Shin belatedly raised his hand to block, but he was a fraction too slow. The elbow slipped past his guard, crashed into his jaw, and sent him flying. Shin hurtled across 15 meters and rolled across the ground. His brother was already upon him, but his clone followed close behind, swinging his sword from below. Suho slammed down his blade to parry and whipped back another elbow, caving in the clone's face. Before the clone could reel away, he grabbed it by the shirt and hurled it overhead. However, Shin's sword was already driving toward his throat. Suho tilted his head sharply, the blade missing by a hair's breadth. But a line of blood appeared along his neck, and Shin wasn't finished. Just as the sword slipped past, Shin twisted his wrist and withdrew, executing a reverse cut. but Suho intercepted it, slamming his clone against him. However, another clone had materialized from the left, driving its katana towards Suho's throat once more. This time, Suho's timing faltered. The clone had appeared long before he'd sensed it. The blade pierced straight into his throat, stopping him mid-movement. His hand extended to seize the clone's face. He froze, trembling, blood trickling from his neck. Shin and his clone stood, watching grimly as his brother staggered back, clutching his throat, only for him to pause a beat later and spread a wry smile across his face. Then he dispersed into a maddening swarm of small crows that rained upon Shin and his clones. Shin and his clones swung their swords frantically, but the crows, with their raucous cawing and crimson eyes, were relentless and infuriating. Shin had despised these creatures since birth. No matter how viciously they swung their blades, it was futile. The crows were persistent, until Shin dropped into a strange stance and muttered, "Form 2. Distortion." At that same moment, the enormous crow on the dais rose fully with a loud, echoing laugh. The laugh thundered across the entire hall. There was no way Shin couldn't have frozen. He stood motionless. 3 of him, actually, stood rigid, studying the distant dais with an expression that reeked of caution. "Remarkable. That golden A-class talent of yours that makes an S-class seem worthless." The crow sighed heavily. "Oh, Shin. You just waltzed in here and bombarded me with a torrent of memories. You shouldn't do that to your brother. After making me suffer all these years, making me bear the weight alone? Is this all you're going to do yet again?" Shin gulped and scowled. "So, I've only been fighting an illusion this whole time." The crow snickered. "Naturally." He paused briefly, his voice shifting to a surprised tone. "Wait. Did you actually think you could stand toe-to-toe with me, Shin?" Shin was speechless for a moment. He had to ask himself the same question. He wasn't stupid, his brother was a patriarch. The only qualification for becoming one was complete mastery over the clan's heritage. He was a paragon too. He had his own talent. It might have been less useful than advanced cloning, but it had went on the wonderful journey to becoming a paragon with him. And it was S-class no matter what. Shin had never doubted for a second that his brother had long ago surpassed him. But the man who would stop at nothing to protect those he loved was an incredibly foolish and reckless man. He could be a pebble facing a mountain, and he would delude himself that climbing was possible. Shin simply didn't care how much of a mountain his brother was. He would let no one harm his family. He could hear scraping as the enormous crow shifted, like metal clawing the ground and a massive rug dragging across stone. Shin gripped his shoulder and rolled it. His gaze remained fixed on the crow moving within the darkness, across fallen columns that littered the floor. He had a basic understanding of Suho's ability. It was darkness itself. When his brother first awakened, what Shin knew was that Suho could manipulate darkness. But it operated on such a molecular level that their father had considered it utterly useless. But of course, even a frog, left alone, could eventually grow to the size of a dragon if it tried hard enough. Northern had spouted the wildest comments as a child. The hall space was vast and uninterrupted by columns. The ceilings hung a tremor away from collapse, and the silver moonlight barely penetrated the darkness through the massive windows that sprawled around. If anything, the darkness seemed to be devouring the light. The crow observed him. It was a colossal bird with crimson eyes and an elongated black beak. Its head was twice the size of a human's, and its entire body, with wings spread wide, resembled a carpet of darkness that consumed the entire room. Shin didn't realize when he had drawn breath. His hand trembled, but he gripped his sword even tighter. "What in the world? Is that you, brother?" The crow chuckled. "Many paragons call this their alternate form, but I prefer to call this my true form, while that fragile body you just fought is merely an alternate." Shin gazed up in awe of his brother. "I'd heard that paragons were special for a reason. Could this be it?" His brother could transform into an actual crow. The patriarch chuckled. "If you'd ever cared enough to study the clan's history, you would understand the meaning of essence manifestation. its power, and why our clan was able to climb to such heights of strength and recognition without merging to become a nation. Shin looked on melancholically. Yeah, I really didn't care about those things. The crow laughed eerily, spreading his wings even wider. This is the beginning of true power, brother. Let me give you a taste. Shin crouched low with a steely glare etched on his face. His eyes blazed crimson. No, Suho. You forgot one thing. He exploded forward at even greater speed, his clones surging simultaneously. All of them hurtled toward the crow, striking in unison before rebounding and diving back into the darkness, unleashing a barrage of attacks from every angle. The crow merely swept a wing, and the entire darkness shifted from one side of the hall to the other, allowing the silver moonlight to actually pierce through. The crow paused momentarily, then chuckled with sinister amusement. There are 4 of you now. So what? You've grown? Is that what I forgot? The hall trembled slightly. In the end, it's just 4 worthless dotards. With several whistling sounds, spears of darkness erupted from the shadows, streaking straight at Shin. The 4 moved with hypnotic precision, all 4 maintaining the same pace, the same lethal flow. As each spear collided with their blades and was deflected, it shattered into fragments of darkness. Those fragments morphed into razor-sharp knives that curved back and lunged at them. But Shin was razor-sharp in his thinking. He twisted in mid-air, evading the daggers by a hair's breadth. All the clones mirrored him in perfect synchronization. By the time they landed, a wall of blackness slammed into all of them. They hurtled backward and crashed against the stone wall. The crow slowly pivoted as the darkness flowed back to its original side of the hall, where they were. Your efforts are primitive, pitiful, and embarrassing, Shin. Even Chun, who worshipped you for the longest time, couldn't be so pathetic. The massive crow gradually folded its wings, dragging them across the ground with that grating scrape. When it fully turned to face his brother, there were 3 figures that had crashed against the wall, leaving spider-webbed cracks in the stone. However, there were 4 sets of cracks, and one Shin was missing. The crow couldn't express a grimace of fury as a facial expression, but when his voice thundered across the hall, it was evident that rage had consumed him. Shin Kageyama, you fool! How dare you flee from me? He lashed out with one wing at neck-breaking speed, driving the razor edge into the clones and crushing them deeper into the wall. The entire palace convulsed violently, and the ceiling that had barely endured this long began to collapse. After leaving the room, the group was escorted away by the 3 young masters of the Kageyama clan. Sale had an inkling that things were not going to go the way they wanted. The moment the patriarch asked them to leave gave that away. Hence, he continued to feel like they had to take matters into their own hands. He didn't know how powerful the sons and daughters of the Kageyama clan were, but he knew that none of them were ascendants yet. But that wasn't what made them dangerous, so it mattered very little. He didn't know how an all-out battle would turn out, but he knew they had to try. Jinxa could take 1. Zahir and Ryan's combination could handle more than 2. He himself could take 1, the marked blade could take 1. Ghost of the Grey Lantern was a very mysterious drifter. Even Sale didn't know his capabilities. But he wanted to be optimistic, so he'd say 2. That accounted for all the sons and daughters of the Kageyama clan. But they weren't the only problem. There were also the prestigious Crow Knights and generals in the clan, those who were comparatively as formidable as the direct descendants and couldn't be ignored, else it would bring feudal damage. He was worried for a bit. But then, the aim wasn't to defeat anybody. The aim was to run. Sale didn't know why he felt so unsettled and felt like running was the best option. He even almost fought his instincts. But this Sale was a very simple man by nature. He mostly did what he always sensed was right and didn't do what he sensed wasn't right. He was the most uprightly moral person one could find. He was sanity personified. A man who had perfect control of himself. Over time, he had learned to trust and rely on himself. And today, once again, Sale was going to do just that. The young masters finally reached a hallway. In the hallway, there were several doors, each leading to different rooms. The young man, Jiang, who had taken them to the patriarch earlier, turned to them. You all can take a room each. When my father is done with his brother, we shall return to fetch you, so you can have a proper audience with him." Sale looked at Jiang and nodded. "Thank you very much, young master." Each of them was shown to their room along the hallway. Even Nebulous Lord was shown to his room. Chan, the eldest brother, left earlier, leaving Jiang and Yun, who walked back from the hallway. Yun glanced back and looked at his brother. "So, that's it." Jiang looked at him inquisitively. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're just going to show them hospitality like that?" Jiang smiled. "Is there something wrong with that, Brother Yun?" Yun shrugged. "Not really. It's just unsettling since we have the worst track record with hospitality." Jiang smiled again and gently held his brother's shoulder. "Don't worry, they shall be well taken care of." He walked ahead of Yun, who stopped and looked at the place Jiang had touched him with disgust. "I hate being touched, damn it." He dusted his shoulder off with an irritated expression before walking away. Meanwhile, as they settled into the rooms after the brothers had left, Sale went into each person's room to relay information to all of them. When he entered Nebulous Lord's room, the creature was gone. Sale stood there at the entrance, a frown creasing his face. None of the windows were open, no signs of anyone leaving the room. So what was wrong? Have they taken him? But who would dare? It was a monster. Sale had to remind himself that they were in the Kageyama clan. Things would happen and wouldn't make sense because people here were absolute lunatics. He immediately walked out and into Zahir's room. The monster is gone. Zahir, whose back was facing him, slowly turned. "Then we look for him. Instead of waiting till dawn to leave, we might as well leave now. This place leaves a harsh irritation in my throat." Sale looked seriously at Zahir. "I couldn't agree more. I'll fetch the others." The hula hoop of flames rolled around Aisha's waist, spilling a torrent of fire that collided with her enemies. She was like a dancer, soft and graceful. The circle flowed from her waist to her grip with the elegance of a performer. Her steps were soft-spoken but sharp and incomprehensible. She twirled the circle in her hands, and as she did, flames flew in arcs and whipped against the robed men who approached her with tornadoes. A knight lunged forward with his greatsword. Aisha shot toward him as if she was going to take the attack head-on. But at the last minute, she faltered to the side and used the circle of flames to tilt his trajectory, countering brute momentum with gentle force. She drew the knight in like a beautiful serpent, rolled upon him, and released her circle of flames into a long whip of fire that slung around his neck. As she landed, he was sent flying and crashing against other knights. The whip of flames lashed away from the knight and swung around with a torrent of fire that collided ruthlessly with everyone who charged in. The robed men took damage but got up just as fast as they went down. Thus, this battle looked like there was no progress at all, even though it had been raging for a while. Aisha hated to admit it to herself, but she was slowly growing tired. Her forte wasn't battle to begin with. Combat had been a necessary evil she'd had to master to protect herself. She was a much more treasured elf beyond the battlefield. So getting winded and tiring out was rather expected. And she wasn't going to give up just because of that. Aisha inhaled, exhaled to guide her breath back to a steady pace. Then she moved. The whip of flames circled back to a wheel, and she hurled it forward with crushing force. The circle became a wheel of flames that rolled into the air and smashed the robed men who released wind blasts, clashing with the rings of flames protecting the child. It rolled through the air and smashed away the second one and the third one. All three of them flew away simultaneously. Then, in the same fluid motion, it rolled back to Aisha. She caught it just in time and brought it down on a knight who appeared before her, lunging his sword from below. Her hand was already descending, so her movement was faster. She brought the ring of flames upon his helmet, and fire burst and exploded across his face. However, the knight finished his attack. He extended his hand with devastating force. Aisha's eyes widened at the last minute, and she rolled away from the strike. However, blood dripped down from her side, and it stung viciously. She clenched her hand on the ring of flame and held her side with the other hand, blood seeping through her fingers. Peacemaker glared with displeasure. Oh goodness, what have you done? Orisha, spilling royal blood is taboo. He grinned maniacally. Orisha, you shouldn't spill too much of your blood. It will enrage the Lord of Air. Just give in already. Aisha glared at Peacemaker, who stood far behind her attackers, both the knights and the robed men. It will only get worse from here, Orisha. Aisha looked at her side with a scrunched face. She released her hand briefly and watched the blood pour down her side before returning her gaze to Peacemaker. You disgusting old man. Your days are numbered. She swirled the ring of flame in one hand. The swirling intensified and created a hypnotic pattern that blazed forth even brighter. Fire exploded from this pattern and consumed everyone in a vortex. Aisha, at the center of it all, shot toward her child and snatched her up. The remaining 5 rings flowed behind her instantly. They erected a shield of flames that blocked the wind spears bombarding her the moment she raced toward her child. She lunged forward, sprinting with desperate haste. The circles protected her back. But it wasn't enough. Peacemaker, the man's hooded face appeared before her, causing her to stagger back mid-motion. She righted herself with a brutal spin and launched into the air. However, Peacemaker was already airborne. He clenched his fists together like a hammer, raised them above his head, and as she lunged upward, he came crashing down. His fists fell like thunderclaps and smashed her back to the ground, heedless of the baby in her arms. The ground shuddered and split, cracks running wide and chunks of debris exploding upward. Peacemaker descended through the dusty haze to grab Aisha from the crater's center. But his mouth opened slightly in shock as he saw no one there. At that moment, she revealed herself behind him. Her leg flew toward his head and crushed it from the side. He went rolling away, shattering the ground as he crashed through it. Aisha didn't wait. The rest of her attackers were already upon her. The knights swung wide arcs as they advanced heavily. The robed men exploded with air and speed, reaching for her. But Aisha simply spun with momentum and shot out of their path with astonishing speed. Not being a speed talent drifter, her movements were remarkable. The rings of flames, all 6, covered her back instantly. They released a torrent of fire that formed a wall. The wall rolled forward and collided with the knights and robed men, burning them with vicious heat. Their screams echoed into the distant night as they suffered. Some were tougher. They pushed through the wall of fire, letting it burn only their cloaks, and continued their pursuit. Aisha didn't know where she was running. She wasn't looking for help from anyone. It seemed the Kageyama clan had even allowed the elves to find her. So she and her husband were doomed. But she needed to find Shin at all costs. Together, they could escape this place. She looked at the child in her arms with an expression of anguish, then hardened her face and pressed forward. Her pursuers were relentless, chasing her through the canyon's corners. No matter how far she ran, the landscape didn't seem to change, and she saw no fortress in sight. She should have known something was wrong when she and Shin were escorted this deep into the mountains with the excuse of no free rooms except this place. They had obviously been preparing for this. Aisha's bleeding worsened, and her pursuers clung to her like a shadow. Then she hit a dead end. Aisha's eyes widened as she faced a slope she'd need to climb. The Kageyama clan had strange terrain. The thing about all these slopes and their general landscape was that they were all easily accessible from within. After all, she and Shin had been brought this far simply by walking through dark hallways. But externally, traversing them was nearly impossible. Aisha stared at the slope, her face turning bleak and colorless as she realized this was the end. Her pursuers caught up and finally formed an arc around her, surrounding her from all sides. All of them, the elves and the knights, were poised to strike, and Peacemaker's voice boomed with laughter as he arrived. Princess, I told you it was enough. Look at you. This is the end of everything. Your excursion in this fake world is over. Time to go back home. Aisha gritted her teeth. Yes, sure. After I kill you. She made a vicious grin as her rings flew toward her. But Peacemaker moved like lightning. His fist shot forward and came down on one ring, shattering it at the edge. He flowed like the wind and grabbed another, Immediately, the fire vaporized. With the one in his hand, he knocked the third and fourth off trajectory, sending them flying in different directions into the sky. Then he hurled the one in his grasp and smashed the ring that had nearly reached Aisha, all while moving fast enough to catch the last one. He looked at it with a scoff and crushed it as he walked back. Then he looked at Aisha. The toy your mother gave you is broken. Let's see how you're going to protect yourself now. Aisha stared, eyes wide, tears streaming down her face. Those flame rings meant everything to her. They were the last keepsake of her mother, the only thing connecting them. It was a weapon her mother had forged using ancient spellcraft. A weapon that allowed her to manipulate fire to a considerable degree, but the true destructiveness lay in the rings themselves. And just like that, the damned old man destroyed them. Aisha gritted her teeth painfully as she stared down at the broken metal shards of her mother's last gift. Her lips trembled. Killing you will be mercy. Peacemaker raised his chin, and his lips curled into a smile. Let's go home, princess. Aisha was broken. She had lost. She'd tried everything, but she'd lost in the end. She wished she could have one last moment with Northern before being taken away. She wished she could tell him all the things she'd never said. She wished she could hide nothing from him. Let him know what a monster she truly was, instead of hoping he could be her chance at becoming a good person. Tears streamed from Aisha's eyes as Peacemaker drew closer. However, Peacemaker stopped and looked up. He grimaced from beneath his hood. Ha! There was a figure at the slope's peak, just standing there looking down at them. Then it moved and leaped down. Peacemaker quickly stepped back. The figure landed with a tremendous impact, dust and stone fragments flying everywhere. They all shielded their faces from the debris. When the dust cleared, a creature with glossy black skin, crystalline eyes narrowed to slits, and a body that seemed sculpted by a master artisan stood before Aisha. Everyone froze in shock, including Aisha. However, the strangest thing happened. The figure turned to Aisha and lowered itself to one knee. A line formed on its face, opening into a mouth, and a cold, grating voice emerged. "M.O. There." All of them began searching every hall, first retracing their paths back to where they'd been brought from. They split into pairs and scattered in different directions, but it was futile. They couldn't find Nebulous Lord. However, they also knew they hadn't even searched 1/3 of the entire fortress within the clan. It had maze-like pathways where it was easy to get lost, so Sale prioritized keeping the team together over desperate searching. That decision still led them to their doom. As he and Ghost of Grey Lantern moved together, racing through the corridors, Ghost suddenly halted and seized Sale's hand, stopping him before he realized the danger. Sale looked at the short, gray-haired boy beside him. "Sir Ghost, is all well?" Ghost nodded grimly. "Company." Sale's expression turned ice-cold as he whipped his face toward the end of the hallway, shrouded in darkness. Immediately, slow clapping echoed from the shadows. "Oh, this one here is quite sharp. Surprising. But pardon me, esteemed visitor. I must ask, why are you all wandering about? You were supposed to stay in your rooms until summoned." The voice clicked with irritation. "This is why we despise hosting visitors. They never listen and always have restless legs. See, it's not my fault if you all die today. Understood?" Sale's face hardened. "What nonsense are you spouting? We're only wandering because you people are being shady, kidnapping one of our own." The voice clicked with irritation again. "Accusing us of kidnapping now? Nah, that's not how things work. If you'd said we killed him, I might have believed you. It's a clan of killers. My brothers and sisters have a knack for just slipping into rooms and slaughtering visitors out of curiosity. But kidnapping has never been our specialty. We prefer being haunted by the dying screams of our victims rather than watching them scream in real time." The voice paused for breath. "So you're the shady ones. But what do I care? I just have the opportunity to discover how beautiful your screams will sound as you die. I look forward to it. Hoo-hoo." The laugh was bone-chilling, slowly fading as if the speaker retreated deeper into the shadows. Sale tried masking it, but he was genuinely concerned. Night was his weakness, Not because his talent weakened after dark. In fact, it was quite the opposite. But for a much more mundane reason. However, his citadel, especially the elites, knew about this vulnerability. Ghost of the Grey Lantern had volunteered to accompany him, and he could see through darkness as clearly as daylight. Sale knew the reason Ghost chose to follow was obviously to compensate for his weakness. And he was grateful for it. But Sale despised burdening anyone. He clenched his teeth. Ghost, go on ahead. I'll handle things here. Ghost frowned. Before he could speak, Sale added, I'm not asking you to abandon me to die. I'm asking you to find an escape route from this rotten place and return with reinforcements. The voice rang out again with eerie laughter. Ho ho. That's hardly appropriate talk from a visitor who came begging for help. Your sins keep mounting. Now I won't even feel guilty when I kill you all. Ghost looked at Sale, reluctant. But Sale nodded, his eyes blazing with determination. Then he opened his hands, summoning his wooden bow. At once, Ghost shot forward with blurring speed. Oh, where do you think you're going? A thunderous clang of sparks rang out, echoing through the darkness as the voice's owner collided with Ghost. Sale, quickly pinpointing the source of the clash, drew his bowstring. 3 arrows of light materialized and shot forth with devastating speed. The owner of the voice, a man with short black hair and vertical, razor-sharp red eyes, tilted sideways, rolled and parried the other 2 arrows, shattering them. With that distraction, Ghost of the Grey Lantern vanished like smoke. The enemy landed, a flicker of regret crossing his face as he glanced back. Then he slowly turned toward the man who had just attacked him. I'll make your death swift, then hunt him down. Sale laughed sharply. You flatter yourself, boy. That man will gut you. I just did you a favor. Not that I expect bloodthirsty killers like you to show gratitude. He drew his string again, manifesting another volley of arrows. This time they didn't just appear on his bow but materialized all around him, bathing his surroundings in pale light. Their battlefield was cramped and narrow, advantageous for Sale, but he was still somewhat handicapped by the unnatural darkness. Even though Sale was illuminating his area, the light barely penetrated the gloom. If anything, the darkness seemed to devour it. He ignored the disadvantages and focused on what he could control. He released the arrows and let them rain down. They streaked forward soundlessly. The young man charged forward to meet them head-on. However, the moment he drew close enough, he suddenly vanished. The arrows sailed harmlessly past. Sale's eyes widened. Barely a heartbeat later, they widened further. The arrows behind him whirled around and shot toward his back. Sale spun through the air with a bead of sweat, extending his bow. A cold metallic clang rang out as a massive blade crashed down upon it. Sale groaned under the brutal impact before being blasted backward, his head slamming into the stone wall. Sale crumpled to the ground, his vision swimming as blood trickled down one side of his face. His attacker's lips twisted into a sneer. What? Don't tell me that's it. You're finished. Sale's gaze turned murderous, and he exploded forward. With lightning speed, his bow began transforming. As he reached the young man, he brought down a wooden staff with crushing force. Simultaneously, rows of light spears materialized around them, bombarding his opponent in a relentless barrage. But the man only smiled, his eyes blazing with bloodlust. He blocked Sale's strike overhead, and as the light spears streaked toward him, he spun and vanished. He materialized from the shadows between Sale's back and the wall, his blade slicing down toward the archer's neck. In that instant, Sale's eyes went wide, cold sweat beading on his neck. For one terrifying millisecond, death seemed inevitable. Terror crawled across his skin, his life flashing before his eyes. But his staff elongated with vicious speed, catching the young Kageyama completely off guard. It slammed into his chest and launched him through the air. Sale instantly propelled himself backward, landing over 100 meters away. Cold. These bastards are stone-cold killers. Yun stood in the corridor, studying the 2 figures before him. He sighed heavily. How did we even come to this? Zahir shrugged. We came to warn you all, but failed to consider how despicable your clan truly is. So this was Plan B. Then again, we're all aware of what killing machines you are, so I hope this isn't quite a surprise. Yun studied the man and the black-haired, pale-skinned boy behind him. Then he shook his head. How pitiful! I didn't mean for this. He opened his palms, and 2 obsidian blades materialized in his grasp. He crossed them before his face and shifted into a combat stance. I know you're a formidable opponent, Zahir al-Noor, so I won't hold back. He shifted his gaze to Ryan. Let's eliminate the trash so we can savor this properly. Zahir's expression darkened. He shot his hand out, snatching Ryan's collar and flipping him with a practiced roll while bringing his other hand up to block Yun's twin blades. Parrying 2 swords with one was disadvantageous, but he was Zahir. The ground cracked beneath him, yet he held firm. Instead, he channeled that force as momentum, twisting and drilling forward through the air with a steel rod in his grip. Yun blocked the strike and staggered back, but in that instant, the ground became treacherous, slick and frigid. His eyes widened as he glanced down. Ice! He snapped his gaze to Ryan, who crouched on the corridor's ledge, palm pressed against stone. Frost spread like wildfire, encasing the entire terrace and floor. Yun's lips curved into a smirk. How delightful! He glided across the ice like a seasoned skater, executed a graceful somersault, and landed balanced on his blade's tip. From his landing point, fractures spiderwebbed through the ice, spreading rapidly until the surface shattered into crystalline fragments. That was your mistake, killer boy, Zahir said coldly as he surged forward, his robes billowing in the breeze. The shattered ice fragments suspended in midair, then dissolved into mist that billowed outward, shrouding everything in dense white fog. Yun frowned as blindness engulfed him from all sides. He was trapped within walls of impenetrable whiteness. He peered left and right, nothing. No sound, no presence. Complete void. His eyes widened with realization. Have they fled? He lunged through the fog, but it shifted states, becoming liquid. What had been walking became waiting, then struggling as his legs grew heavy and his lungs fought for air. Worse still, the water's temperature spiked, scalding his skin and face, pouring into his mouth and searing his throat. He thrashed against the impossible circumstances stacked against him. Then, in a single instant, everything froze solid. He was trapped within a crystalline prison that encased half the compound. Zahir regarded him from beyond the ice. I'm sparing you because your death won't quench my hatred. The one I seek is your father. But that reckoning isn't today. He raised his scarf to mask his face. Young Ryan, we depart. Ryan nodded and fell into step behind him. Zaire and Jinxa emerged from the tower onto the plain, where dark-armored knights stood at various posts. Some appeared to be conducting cleanup operations. The moment they stepped outside, every knight turned, immediately spotting them. Absolute silence stretched taut. Zaire appeared as shocked and bewildered as they were. Jinxa, however, remained utterly indifferent to everything, until certain triggers loosened her restraints. No one truly understood what set the blood doll off. They only knew she shouldn't be unleashed unless absolutely necessary. Zaire swallowed hard and forced a smile. Please, continue your work. We'll just head back inside. As he turned, a harsh feminine voice cut through the air. Halt! They froze and slowly pivoted back. Zaire maintained his wide grin as a woman strode toward them. She was tall and elegant, with cropped hair and sharp bangs. Her crimson eyes glowed like pinpricks of fire behind slits narrow as needles' width. Behind her followed another woman who had been overseeing the knights, shorter, clad in a black dress wholly inappropriate for battlefields, looking thoroughly irritated by everything. The lead woman approached and stopped mere feet away. She never smiled, had never possessed one. Her voice carried a razor's edge with brutal directness. Aren't you the visitors Yun brought in? Zaire chuckled nervously, glancing around. I'm not sure who this Yun is, ma'am. The woman studied him with suspicion, her gaze like a dagger's edge slowly catching light as it's drawn. Then she tilted her head suddenly, short hair cascading sideways. Doesn't matter. You shouldn't be here. I'll just eliminate you both and report to Shin. My apologies. She didn't move, at least not toward them, but something else did. Too fast, too thin, blurring into motion. Sparks spiraled around Zaire and Jinxa as he stepped forward, a compact hand axe materializing in his grip. He used the weapon to snare what flew at him, a thin chain that wrapped around the blade. He drove it groundward and rolled aside as a gleaming silver sickle whistled over his head. By shortening the chain's length, he'd prevented decapitation as the sickle would have otherwise carved through his neck from behind. But Zaire had no time to celebrate this small victory. The woman barely moved, yet her chain and sickle whipped through the air, weaving vicious arcs across the entire space. Zaire spun his axe between his palms, eyes tracking the primary blade. As it struck toward him, he swung to intercept. The sickle was lightning quick, recoiling like a serpent's strike before lashing out from another angle. Zaire matched its speed, spinning his weapon in fluid motions, deflecting the blade and sending it careening off course. The woman's gaze drifted to Jinxa, who remained utterly detached from the violent exchange. Zaire's eyes widened the moment he caught her shift in focus. Oh hell no! Electricity already crackled between his fingers as he pivoted toward Jinxa, desperate to intercept whatever strike the woman was preparing. Then the lady's lips twisted into a manic grin. Your flank is completely exposed, fool. She jerked her hand, gripping the chain tight before whipping it downward and thrusting forward. The sickle and its tether became a blur, changing trajectory with razor-sharp, imperceptible speed. Zaire couldn't predict its path. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. But then the blood doll shifted her head, and her eyes narrowed to deadly slits. Destruction, destruction, destruction. Gilliver stood at the balcony of the tower, watching the distant lands crumble and roll aside as storms clashed against each other. The Empire shuddered with the destruction ravaging the far reaches, earthquakes racing across the land. Every shockwave swept over to this side, shattering fragile things. At one point, the ground had suddenly cleaved from that distant place all the way to here and to the ocean. People tumbled into the gaping hole, yet the knights and civilians helped each other, so the damage was nothing compared to that of the flood. Perhaps the people of Lewengard had learned a vital lesson from the flood. Now that this devastation was unfolding, they worked together. But Gilliver knew this was nothing like the flood. There was a presence in that clashing storm that, in his entire goddamn life, he had never felt. There were things out there, and what was even more unbelievable was that actual people were fighting those things. He wanted to grip the terrace railing, but it had cracked pitifully from relentless shockwaves. He stared at it with doubt, not doubting the terrace's ability to hold one more time. Instead, he shook his head and leaped. He landed gently with the grace of a leaf. As he did, several knights approached him. Tower Master, we have found no sign of Lady Hinai. There is no doubt. She has been abducted by those people. Gilliver stared into the distance and clenched his fist in fury. He focused on the knights before him. How long before the wall collapses? There was already an enormous fissure separating it, but somehow the entire wall still stood. One knight shook his head. I am not sure, Tower Master. It seems the next shockwave will bring the entire thing down. Gilliver suppressed the urge to clench his fist again. Instead, he turned back to the knights. Well, evacuate everyone as fast as you can. Don't sit around. The knights sprinted away, shouting the Tower Master's command to every other knight, who in turn did the same. A knight clad in dark armor reached Gilliver. As he did, the Tower Master looked at him with a sigh of relief. Sir Sheer. Sir Gilly. What in the world is happening? Gilliver shook his head. I have no idea, but I am certain that all this is just collateral damage from what's happening out there, in that distance. The man followed Gilliver's gaze toward the distance beyond the wall. His own face paled. If you call this collateral damage, are storms battling each other? Did all descend? Because what kind of collateral damage is this? It can't be possible. Gilliver shook his head grimly. I know you won't believe me, but I have been in the presence of powerful people, Sir Sheer, and I have never felt anything like those things clashing with each other. Those things must be pure vessels of destruction. Nothing more, nothing less. The knight looked down, then suddenly remembered something. Oh, good fuck. Gilliver looked at the knight commander. Is all well? The knight nodded. Yes, it's just that. I just remembered what a young boy and some strangers who came ashore a few hours ago had said. Gilliver frowned slightly. What did he say? What was that? Knight Commander Sheer said. He said the fate of the world was at stake and he didn't have time to play chase with some rook. I believe I was the rook. He hesitated. After that, he soared straight into the air. Others followed him. Jessie, and even Linus were among them. Gilliver's frown deepened ominously. Please, Sir Sheer, describe this young boy. The knight gestured slightly as he described. He was this tall. He had white hair, snowy like Lady Henai's, and blue eyes, beautiful like the ocean. But they also held a strange and unsettling hostility he was suppressing. Gilliver's eyes widened, his face drained of color. The knight commander caught him as he staggered back. Gilliver nodded and steadied himself. Yes, I'm fine. It's just… damnation. The knight commander still watched him carefully. Gilliver sighed. Whatever is happening there, I'm not certain, but I think Lady Henai's son is part of it. The knight commander's gaze sharpened with hostility. Again? That boy. I heard he came and caused trouble some months ago during my absence, and he stood his ground against the Emperor. Gilliver nodded. Well, yes, sort of. But this time, everything seems to be on a vastly different scale. The knight commander's brows furrowed mildly. Would you care to explain? The tower master trembled slightly. Perhaps he is saving the world? The knight commander stared thoughtfully. They were silent for a moment. Then he suggested, shouldn't we reach out to the Emperor then? Gilliver shook his head. I'm afraid it will make no difference. The knight commander raised his brows. What do you mean, Tower Master? The Tower Master responded with a slight tremor but straightforward tone. I think we would be endangering the Emperor if we dared. The knight commander's frown darkened. Tower Master, I understand that last time he stood his ground against the Emperor and even helped save the city. But aren't you placing too much faith in him? Gilliver, still pale, looked at the knight commander with a puzzled expression. Well, he couldn't fly last time, could he? Nothing was working. Absolutely nothing was working. No matter what he hurled at the origin of chaos, the bastard simply walked through it all. Northern didn't want to admit it. But this guy, he was invincible. Nothing could touch him. Not absolute heat, not absolute zero, not using eclipsing dread to rewrite the laws of his attacks. None of it was working. Khal, the bastard, was above the laws of reality and simply strolled through everything. He was even enjoying it. He was smiling at some attacks, looking at Northern like, oh, this is new. Grading his assaults with leisure while Northern worked desperately to bring down the damn origin. Northern would have loved to say he could go all day, that they could just keep trading blows back and forth. But sadly, that wasn't the case. He had a limit, and the crushing truth was that after the relentless torrent of attacks he had unleashed without pause, he was rapidly approaching that limit. Cryo's hand moved with terrifying speed, faster than Northern himself was moving. The origin seized him by the jaw, instantly killing his momentum, hoisted him into the sky, and slammed him to the ground. The ground convulsed violently, cracks spreading in an instant as debris exploded into the air. Northern bounced up and coughed blood. Before he could recover, the origin had snatched him by the throat. Then the world parted before them. They did not move, but Northern felt his scenery blur and continue to blur. His mind tried to make sense of what was happening to him, why it felt like everything around him was unraveling while he alone was left behind. But the more he tried to understand, the more abandoned he felt. He struggled to grasp any fragment of reality. His mind felt shattered into pieces as he was hurled across distance at terrifying speed. By the time the speeding landscape paused, Northern entered a state of unconsciousness. not the kind that led to enlightenment. He simply blacked out from the velocity. Cryo looked down at him with a pitiful expression, his eyes cold as winter stone. He clenched his hand around Northern's neck, lifted him up, and drove his fist into his stomach. The punch expelled a blast of air from Northern's back that detonated against the ground, raising everything like a bomb. Stones disintegrated and exploded into the air with tremendous force. The Origin, with a straight face, drove into Northern again a second time. This time, the surroundings suffered catastrophic damage. The moment his fist connected with Northern's abdomen, he was jolted from his fainted state. A circular shockwave erupted, obliterating the ground and valleys around them. Cryo's hand, from the point of contact, generated crimson lightning that streaked around the markings of the circular devastation. Northern's eyes bulged as blood exploded from his nose, mouth, and ears. The Origin struck with a blow first, then with imperceptible speed, opened the strike and, in the same breath, attacked with the tip of his fingers. He curled them back to a fist and hammered Northern's gut 5 times in the span of a single punch. Nothing was perceived at first. Then 5 consecutive shockwaves of tremendous air blasts exploded from Northern's back with such force that even the molten vein armor could not endure. It exploded into jagged pieces from behind, leaving Northern's back completely exposed. Cryo did not stop there. He hurled Northern forward with devastating speed. They crashed into a forest, and he held Northern's head forward, crushing it through countless trees. Massive trees that had stood for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years, were shattered to splinters by the force with which he hurled Northern. He paused somewhere in the middle of the forest. His sudden stop generated a tremendous shockwave that blew backward all the surrounding trees. Their leaves and branches flew as if assaulted by a terrifying hurricane, yet they still managed to hold on. He suddenly lifted his foot off the ground, holding Northern by his head above a pile of dirt. Then he spun with tremendous speed, whirling so fast that he became a literal tornado, carving deep grooves of destruction into the earth. The trees that had struggled to hold before were now being uprooted with ease, flying around the tornado in circles. At the tip of this whirlwind was Northern. His eyeballs had rolled back, his mouth hung open with drool scattering everywhere, as he was swept along by the tide of unstoppable force. As Cryo released him, Northern exploded across the distance, rolling as he crashed and tumbled through the rest of the forest, destroying trees with a force that resounded across the heavens like the destruction of the world itself. He blacked out for a moment, unable to stop the momentum. He was growing weary, and his body was moving at a pace far greater than his mind, which he presumed was fast, could catch up with. Northern finally crashed into a high slope of the mountain. His impact generated a shockwave that exploded across the entire peak, sending a massive eruption of dust into the heavens. Silence fell over the atmosphere as the dust thickened into fog, shrouding that portion of the forest. Meanwhile, Cryo, who was far behind, walked forward slowly. His expression remained stone-cold, not an iota of emotion on his face as he marched toward Northern. He turned his head slightly to the left and stopped. Barely a millisecond later, a black light streaked past, cleaving the entire forest in its wake. The impact as it connected with Cryo caused another shockwave that exploded into the sky. Splintered trees and sand erupted skyward. Chaos Prince dove through the mist of dust, only to see his father holding the shimmering black arrow forged from void essence. But he was not surprised. He was even smiling as Cryo clenched his hand around the arrow and crushed it into fragments that vanished in the air. "Are you even taking this seriously?" Chaos Prince forced out a small laugh upon hearing his father's words. "Actually, I should be asking you, aren't you taking this a bit too seriously? Do you actually intend to destroy us both?" Cryo's gaze turned deep, dark, and cold. "There wouldn't need to be such measures if you just handed over the void." Chaos Prince laughed again, more eerily. Then he bared his teeth with closed eyes, grinning at his father. "No, father." Cryo turned back too late. Even as he did, he collided with the force from behind and was sent reeling through the ground. Both of them exploded from the forest with tremendous speed, shooting toward the sky with a force that flattened the forest beneath them. Cryo, with intense effort, tore himself away from Northern's iron grip. He clenched his fist and struck Northern's cheek. A tremendous force exploded outward, but instead of flying away from the impact, Northern absorbed it instantly. Cryo struck Northern again, but the force died down immediately. Another blow, the force vanished. More and more, and the power actually began to diminish. He then glared at Northern as if the boy were a parasite beneath his skin. "I have no use for you. Just die." Northern grinned maniacally. "No, you retard. The only one dying today is you. Let's see if you can handle your own attacks." Northern hurled his head back and smashed it into the Origin's skull. Using full impact's recoil, he returned every absorbed blow in one devastating strike. Northern's skull crashed against Cryo's with the recoil of every absorbed strike. The world seemed to rupture. The mountain itself caved inward, ridges shattering and peaks collapsing as a wave of annihilation burst outward. Valleys split open like wounds across the land, and the heavens shook with a deafening roar. Cryos reeled backward through the air, rolling across clouds with unstoppable momentum before suddenly halting himself mid-motion. He moved his hand while suspended in the air and touched his nose, then brought that single finger to his eyes. There was a smear of silver liquid on it. Cryos's expression twisted darkly as he muttered, "A human made me bleed." His stone-cold expression cracked for the first time, his gaze narrowing with genuine malice. His body trembled with barely contained violence, as though his own essence had been turned against him. Northern stumbled forward, his body shattered yet blazing with terrible vitality. His teeth bared through blood, his eyes swirling with manic light. He laughed. "Ahaha! This feels better than any blow I've ever landed. I headbutt some sense into you, didn't I?" Cryos's face darkened even more savagely. "You profane being." Northern laughed even harder, screaming, "That's more like it. That is how the origin of madness should sound." The one thing that had unsettled him from the beginning of this battle was how calm and collected Cryos had been. The origin of blood, war, madness, and chaos was just too composed for him to be considered one. And it was because the bastard still had everything going well for him. Even when he bled from the fight with Ul, his perfectly cool countenance remained intact. But now a single attack from Northern was striking him in places he couldn't hide. There was no doubt about it. This had to be a mental battle as much as it was physical. At that moment, Northern realized he would have to attack the Origin's pride to make him lose control enough for a mistake to happen. He smirked at his realization, but still, could he last long enough? Northern roughly wiped the blood dripping from his nose, leaving a crimson smear on his cheek. "I am as resilient as my will to survive." Cryos exhaled slowly, crimson smoke hissing from his lips. "Foolish human. You dare." The Origin's hand stretched outward, and the space around Northern collapsed inward. Forest, stone, and even the scattered lightning shards bent toward Cryos's palm, pulled into a gravitational vortex that sought to crush Northern into nothing. Northern struggled. He gritted his teeth and immediately spawned a spiraling torrent of ice that exploded outward, feeding the black hole something to devour. He erupted with tremendous flight force, expecting to escape the range. But he had gravely underestimated the gravitational pull. The ice he shot at it consisted of solid fragments, yet they flowed out like a frozen river, all of it instantly swallowed. He was only able to move an inch higher and was now being dragged back with fierce intensity. Northern gritted his teeth. "Where is that bastard?" A vicious black arrow suddenly streaked past him and sent the Origin's head snapping back. Cryos froze in that position. His hand stretched out, his head knocked back with a black arrow protruding from his eye, his hand poised to catch. Northern was startled for a moment. He missed it. He glanced down at the Chaos Prince, who was grinning at him with a thumbs up. Northern frowned as something cold crawled across his body. He quickly focused on escaping the Origin, vanishing from the pulling vortex with desperate speed. Northern glowered from the distance amidst the clouds and erupted with fury. The winds and heavens responded with the same level of vicious wrath. The sky rumbled with a thick, wrathful sound, as if the clouds were being rolled by a colossal hand forged of steel. Lightning rods streaked down in jagged patterns, connecting to Northern's hands. At the same time, the winds picked up like titanic steeds and rushed forward, obliterating the forest far below. To the north of the forest lay a vast desert plain that separated the wall of Luengard Empire from the scene where Northern and Cryos battled. But the desert was stirring with a sandstorm as the winds answered Northern's fury. The Chaos Prince, who was amidst the forest, cried out as he ran through the crumbling woodland. "Hey! Hey! Your partner is here! Hey!" His eyes widened as a torn tree hurtled toward his face. Mere inches from his widened eyes before he suddenly dropped into a crouch and let it fly past. The ground trembled violently, and immediately the Chaos Prince lunged into the air, sprouting large black wings that seemed delicately carved from liquid darkness with intricate detail. He breathed for a moment, closing his eyes, but as he opened them, a streak of lightning split across the sky, slamming into him, coursing through his entire body, and flinging him skyward. The entire air crackled with lightning that charged toward Northern as he descended upon the origin of chaos, lightning spreading behind him like an enigmatic cloak. Cryos, with cold fury, opened his palms and hurled them forward. The two clashed, and the world paused for a moment to process. The devastation, then havoc. Veins of lightning, blue and brilliant, black and crimson, spread outward with tremendous force and speed. Even the Chaos Prince had to curl his wings over his face to shield himself from them. The blue and brilliant lightning immediately seared his wings to a crisp, while the crimson lightning caused them to corrode and mutate into something else, becoming grotesque, quickly sprouting horns at their edges and extending beyond normal length. But as soon as the grotesque transformation began, he frowned, and immediately the horns, as though terrified of something even more sinister, sank back inside. His wings returned to normal in an instant. He looked at his left wing, half of which had been burned away by Northern's lightning, and sighed. Then it regrew instantly. The normal lightning and the corrupted version that Cryos had tainted continued to surge forward, crashing into the forest and racing onward like rabid beasts until they collided with the massive wall of the small empire. Thanks to the wall, the entire civilization of Luengard was saved from being consumed by madness. However, the worst had happened. Where the lightning struck to destroy, its maddened version struck to drive beings to madness. The entire desert and the wall of Luengard rose as something different, something vile that should not exist.